A single shot tears the dawn open. The cord binding the girl's wrists on the gallows parts clean, and nobody sees who fired. 60 people crowd the dirt street. Nobody speaks. Nobody runs. The early light comes in sideways across the rooftops, red and thin, like something searching for what it lost. That gallows went up in 48 hours. Built in the dark, built by torchlight. Men don't raise a gallows in the night for justice. They raise it to send a message, then boots, slow, uneven. An old man walking straight up the center of the road toward 5 loaded guns. He stops, pushes his hat back with 2 fingers, and before he says a word, he lifts his head and looks at the rooftops. Like he already knows exactly who's lying up there. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge. That was the first thing Wren noticed. The way the light came in sideways, red and thin, cutting across the rooftops of Harrow Bluff, like it was looking for something it had lost, like it was embarrassed to be here at all. She had been on the roof since before dawn, not because she planned it. Not exactly. She had gone up to fix a loose shingle above the back room of the shop. That was what she told herself, anyway. And then she had stayed, because something felt wrong. Had felt wrong since Tuesday, when Fitch rode through town with 3 men she had never seen before, and went straight to Winslow's office without stopping for water or food, or anything a man stops for after a long ride. Men who don't stop. That meant something. She had learned that from her father. Watch the ones who don't stop, May. Except he had called her May. Her middle name. Her mother's name. Nobody in Harrow Bluff knew that. Nobody in Harrow Bluff knew much about her at all, which was precisely the point. She was Wren Calloway, seamstress. Quiet. Capable with a needle. Unremarkable in the way a woman needed to be unremarkable in a town like this one. She lay flat on the sloped roof now, her cheek against the warm wood, and she watched. The Winchester Model 1873 was beside her. Not in her hands, beside her. There was a difference. Her father had taught her that too. A gun in your hands means you've already decided. A gun beside you means you're still thinking. She was still thinking. Below her, the main street of Harrow Bluff was filling up. Slowly. The way water fills a low place. Not rushing. Just arriving. Because there was nowhere else for it to go. There were maybe 60 people down there. Maybe 70. Hard to count when they kept shifting, kept pressing toward the edges of the street, kept putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the thing in the center of town without actually leaving. Because leaving meant passing it, and nobody wanted to pass it. The gallows. Harrow Bluff didn't have a permanent gallows. That was important to understand. What stood in the middle of the street had been built in the last 48 hours. She knew because she had heard the hammering 2 nights ago and had gone to her window and watched Winslow's men working by torchlight, and she had felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the September air. A gallows built in secret, in the dark, in 48 hours. That was not justice. That was a message. The structure was rough but functional. 2 upright posts, maybe 9 feet tall, with a crossbeam lashed between them. A rope hung from the center of that beam. The noose already tied, already sized, already waiting. And standing on the wooden platform beneath that rope, hands bound behind her back with rough cord, her dark hair loose and tangled around her face, was Cora Devlin, 17 years old. Wren knew her. Not well. Harrow Bluff was not a town where you knew anyone well. Not if you were smart. But she knew Cora the way you know a place you pass every day, the shape of her, the general outline. The girl who came in twice a month for thread and sometimes lingered longer than the errand required, looking at the bolts of fabric the way someone looks at a door they're not sure they're allowed to open. She had dark eyes, steady ones, the kind that had seen things and decided not to look away. She was not crying now. That was the thing that hit Wren hardest. Not the rope, not the crowd's silence. The fact that Cora Devlin was standing on that platform with a noose 3 inches from her neck, and she was not crying. Her chin was up. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes were moving across the crowd slowly, like she was memorizing faces. Like she wanted to remember who was there, who stood and watched, who did nothing. Wren looked at the men around the platform. 4 of them, positioned at the corners like fence posts, all armed, all carrying that particular kind of stillness that meant they were not afraid of what they were doing and had done things like this before. One of them a man Wren recognized as Decker. Winslow's foreman stood closest to the lever mechanism on the right side of the platform. His hand was not on it, but it was near it, the way a man's hand is near his glass when he's thinking about drinking. And then there was Fitch. Fitch stood to the left of the platform, slightly apart from the others, which was where he always stood, slightly apart, slightly elevated in his own mind from whatever was happening around him. He was not a large man. That was the thing people always got wrong about Fitch. They expected something massive, something obvious. What they got was a man of average height, average build, with very pale eyes and a quality of absolute stillness that was more unsettling than any physical size could be. Like a weight on a scale that doesn't move no matter what you put on the other side. He was watching the crowd. Not Cora. The crowd. Reading it. Calculating what it would take, and whether it would come, and if it did, whether he would need to do anything about it, or whether simple presence would be enough. It was enough. It always was. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The 60 or 70 people of Harrow Bluff stood in the sideways red light of a September morning and watched a 17-year-old girl stand under a rope and did not make a sound. Wren's hand moved half an inch toward the Winchester, then stopped. You're still thinking. She was still thinking. She needed to keep thinking, because there were 4 armed men and Fitch, and that lever, and one wrong move meant Cora Devlin died in the next 10 seconds, and the crowd scattered, and Winslow got exactly what he wanted, which was, what did he want? That was the part she couldn't see yet. That was the part that had kept her on this roof since before dawn, staring at something that looked like punishment, but felt like demonstration. You don't build a gallows in the dark in 48 hours because someone stole something. You build it because you want people to see it. You want them to understand something. You want them to carry the image home and look at it in the dark and feel the weight of it pressing on their chest every time they think about pushing back. This was not about Cora Devlin. Cora Devlin was a word in a sentence that Winslow was writing for somebody else. Who? Wren's eyes moved along the crowd, looking for the someone else. Looking for the person whose face would change when they looked at the girl on the platform. The person who would go a specific shade of pale that had nothing to do with general horror and everything to do with personal catastrophe. She was still looking when she heard the sound. Boots on packed earth, deliberate, unhurried. A rhythm that was slightly uneven, not the stumbling unevenness of a drunk man, but the measured unevenness of a man compensating for something. A leg that didn't work quite right. A pace built over years of accommodation, so ingrained it had become simply the way the man walked. The same way some men squinted in sun they'd long stopped noticing. She tracked the sound before she saw the source. He came from the south end of the street, walking up the center of it, which was she processed this in the same way she processed everything, fast and with complete attention, which was either the bravest thing she had ever seen or the stupidest, and the line between those two things had always been thinner than people liked to admit. He was not young. She could see that immediately, even from above. The hair under the battered hat was more gray than anything else. The coat a duster that had once been dark brown, or maybe dark green, impossible to tell now, hung from shoulders that were still broad, but carried in them the slight forward lean of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. Not a burden you could put down. The other kind. He walked at the same pace all the way to the edge of the open space around the platform, and then he stopped. He looked at Cora, just for a moment. Then he looked at Fitch. Fitch saw him. Of course Fitch saw him. Fitch saw everything. The pale eyes moved to the old man and stayed there, reading, calculating. The crowd felt the shift. The collective attention moved. When 60 people all turned to look at the same thing, at the same time, you can feel it even when you're on a roof 40 feet away. It's a physical thing. A change in pressure. Nobody said anything for 3 seconds. 5 seconds. The old man reached up and pushed his hat back slightly with 2 fingers, a casual gesture. The kind a man makes when he wants to see better, or when he wants people to see his face. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud. That was what made it land so hard. A loud voice in that silence would have been expected, would have given people something to brace against. This voice was simply present, clear. The voice of a man who had spent a great many years saying things that needed to be heard in rooms where people would have preferred not to hear them. If she isn't released, he said, we're going to need 5 coffins. The silence that followed was of a completely different quality than the silence that had come before. The before silence had been silent, the silence of fear. This was the silence of something recalibrating, of people doing arithmetic they hadn't expected to do this morning. Fitch let it sit for exactly 3 seconds. Professional. Measured. I count one of you, Fitch said. His voice was flat and had no particular emotion in it, and that was its own kind of threat. Old man. The man did not answer immediately. He let Fitch's words reach him, let them settle, and then he did something that Wren, from her rooftop, found deeply strange and deeply interesting. He looked up, not at the sky, not at the rope, not at Cora, at the rooftops. At the rooftop she was lying on. Her breath stopped, just for a moment, just for the duration of one heartbeat that suddenly couldn't decide whether to continue or not. He couldn't see her. The angle was wrong, and she was flat against the slope, and there was no way, except the way he was looking, was not the way a man looks when he's searching. It was the way a man looks when he already knows. The way you look at a door you've been told has something behind it. Not curious. Certain. Your father said you'd be watching from a high place. She didn't know that yet. She would know it in 20 minutes, in the back of Tio's shop, when the old man said it to her face. But something in her body understood it before her mind did, because her hand moved not toward the Winchester this time, but to it, wrapping around the stock, finding the familiar shape of it, the way you find a wall in a dark room. By feel, by long practice, by the part of yourself that moves before thinking can slow it down. She had held this rifle since she was 12 years old. She had held it the morning her father came home from a week in the field and sat her down at the kitchen table with the Winchester across his knees and said, "This is not a toy, and it is not a trophy, and it is not for showing. You understand what it's for?" And she had said yes, even though she was 12 and hadn't really understood. And he had said, "It's for keeping things from happening that shouldn't happen. That's all. That's the whole purpose of it." And she had thought that was the simplest and most serious thing anyone had ever said to her, and she had never forgotten it. She thought about it now. Something was about to happen that shouldn't happen. Something very specific. Something with a rope and a lever and a 17-year-old girl with her chin up and her eyes moving across a crowd, memorizing faces. Her finger found the trigger guard. Not the trigger, the guard. Still thinking. Below, Fitch had turned his head slightly, speaking to one of the 4 men at the platform corners. The man on the left began to move. Slow and easy, wide arc, going around the outside of the open space, trying to get behind the old man, or at least beside him, to remove the option of simply walking away. The old man watched him go. Didn't move. The man on the right began to move in the other direction. Same tactic, different angle. The old man watched him too. Still didn't move. Wren tracked the man moving left, watched his trajectory, calculated where he would be in 4 seconds, and what angle that gave her, and what the consequences were. And it's for keeping things from happening that shouldn't happen. She exhaled, one clean breath, out, all the way out, until her lungs were empty, and the world was quiet, and there was nothing in it but the geometry of the moment, the angles, the distances, the rope, the girl, the man who had walked up the center of the street with his hat pushed back and his coat full of history and his voice full of something she couldn't name yet, but recognized from a long time ago. The trigger, the rope binding Cora's wrists. 60 yards, maybe 65. This is what it's for. The Winchester spoke. One sound, sharp and flat and immediate, rolling out across the rooftops of Harrow Bluff and bouncing off the dry hills beyond, and coming back a half-second later as its own echo. A conversation the rifle was having with the landscape. The cord binding Cora's wrists parted. Not dramatically. Not with any flourish. Just parted. Cleanly. The way a thread parts when the right scissors find it. Cora's arms dropped to her sides. The crowd made a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a gasp, but somewhere in between. The sound of 60 people suddenly, remembering they had bodies, and those bodies were frightened. The man at the left corner had stopped moving. He was looking up at the rooftops, and his hand was on his holster, and his face was doing the calculation of whether drawing was a good idea when he didn't have a target yet. Wren gave him one. Not him, his gun. The second shot hit the holster casing at the base with enough force to tear it from his belt entirely and send the whole assembly spinning into the dust. His hand was suddenly holding nothing. He looked at it. He looked at the dust where his sidearm was. He did not draw again. The old man in the duster had not moved during any of this. He was still standing in the same spot, in the same posture, with his hat pushed back at the same angle. But something had changed in his bearing. A slight settling. The way a man settles when something he was hoping for happens. Fitch was looking at the rooftops now, moving his gaze slowly, methodically, across the line of buildings. She tracked him, tracking her, keeping the rifle still, keeping herself still, knowing that stillness was the better camouflage. That movement was what eyes found. His gaze paused. Don't. His gaze moved on. She breathed again. Below, Fitch made a decision that surprised her. Not because it was unexpected, but because of how quickly he made it. He had calculated, in the time it took 2 shots to fire, that the situation had changed in a way that made continuation more expensive than retreat. And Fitch was above everything else a man who understood cost. He said something to Decker, too quiet for her to catch from the roof. Decker's hand moved away from the lever. One by one, Winslow's men pulled back, not running, walking. The careful retreat of men who were establishing that this was a choice and not a rout. Fitch himself turned with the particular slowness of a man who wants everyone watching to understand that he is not afraid of what's behind him. He walked south. The others followed. The crowd did not cheer. That was the right call. Nobody cheered. Because Fitch walking away was not the end of anything. Everybody in Harrow Bluff knew that. You did not cheer when a storm passed overhead without breaking. You watched it go, and you thought about your roof and your windows, and you knew it was going to come back, and it was going to be worse. Cora Devlin stood on the platform with the noose still above her head and her freed hands hanging at her sides, and she looked out at the crowd, and she still didn't cry. Wren watched her, and then she watched the old man. He was still in the street, still in the same spot. People were beginning to move around him, not toward him, but around him the way water moves around a rock, giving him a wide berth, and not meeting his eyes. He was looking up again. At the rooftops, at her particular rooftop, he was waiting. She came down the back way, the way she always used. The narrow gap between the seamstress shop and the millinery next door, just wide enough for a woman to press through sideways, which a man in a duster absolutely could not do, which was part of the point of it. She kept the Winchester slung across her back. She wanted her hands free. Old habit. Her father's voice. Your hands should always be free. That's the first rule. Everything else comes after. She came around the corner of the building into the main street, and she found him standing approximately where she had calculated. And she came up behind him at a distance of about 8 feet and put her hand on the Colt at her hip, not drawing, just resting there, and she said, "Don't turn around." He didn't. Good. A man who doesn't turn around when told not to is either very disciplined or very tired. Both were potentially useful. "You've got 30 seconds, she said. "Tell me why you walked up the middle of that street." He was quiet for a moment. Not calculating, she thought. Not deciding whether to lie. More like a man organizing something that needed to come out in a particular order. Because someone needed to, he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got right now." She looked at the back of his coat, the dust on it, the wear at the collar, the way the right shoulder sat slightly higher than the left. Compensation for something, an old injury maybe, or the habit of a shooting stance held too many years. "You looked at my roof," she said. "Before you spoke. You looked at it directly." "Yes, how did you know?" He was quiet again. "Longer this time. Your father told me you'd find the high ground," he said. "Said it was the first thing you always did. Walk into any new place, you find the high ground." The words hit her in the chest the way cold water hits you when you're not expecting it. Not painful. Just suddenly, completely present. "Say that again," she said. "My father is dead." "Yes," the old man said. "I know." She stood there for 3 seconds, maybe 4. The street was emptying around them, people peeling away toward doorways and side streets, wanting to be elsewhere before anything else happened. Cora Devlin had been helped down from the platform by a woman Wren didn't know, and was being guided toward the north end of town, stumbling slightly. Finally, looking like a girl who had been through something instead of a girl watching everyone else go through it. "Turn around," Wren said. He turned. She looked at his face for the first time. 63, she thought, give or take. The face of a man who had spent most of those years outside, in weather that didn't particularly care about him. Deep lines around the eyes and at the corners of the mouth. Gray stubble. That was past the point of being deliberate and not quite at the point of being a beard. Eyes that were she held on this blue-gray. The kind of color that didn't change much in different light because it had started out neutral and stayed that way. A face that had once been, she thought, fairly handsome, and now was simply weathered, used. The way good tools look after a long time. Not ruined. Broken in. There was a badge-shaped scar on his left coat lapel. The kind of mark left when a badge has been worn for so many years that when you take it off, the metal has once worn a ghost of itself into the fabric. She knew what that ghost meant. She had grown up watching it happen to her father's coat. "You were a lawman," she said. "Deputy U.S. Marshal." He said it the same way he would have said, "I used to live somewhere else." A fact. Geography. Retired. "What's your name?" "Aldous Prentice." Something moved across her face. She was aware of it happening, and could not stop at a quick contraction, involuntary, like a muscle. Remembering something the mind had decided to set aside, she pressed it down. Filed it. "Not now. There's a back way," she said. "Follow me. And don't talk in the open." Tio Vargas's forge occupied a long, low building at the eastern edge of Harrow Bluff, set back from the main street by about 40 yards of open scrub. It smelled of iron and coal, and the particular burnt mineral smell of metal at temperature, and it was, for reasons that had accumulated slowly over 4 years, one of the only places in town where Ren Calloway felt something like comfortable. Tio was at the anvil when they came in, but he stopped when he saw them. He had a way of reading situations quickly, not the dramatic, quick read of a man who has been in a lot of fights, but the quieter, quick read of a man who has survived a lot of situations by correctly identifying what kind of situation he was in. He set down his hammer. He looked at the old man. He looked at Ren. He didn't say anything. That was one of the things Ren had always liked about Teo Vargas. Cora Devlin was already there. The woman who had helped her down from the platform, Tio's neighbor, the baker's wife, a woman called Hester, who asked no questions about anything, and never had brought her here, apparently, and then left, without waiting to be thanked. Cora was sitting on an overturned crate near the cold forge, her wrists red from the rope, a cup of water in her hands that she was not drinking, just holding. She looked up when Ren came in. "You were on the roof," she said. "Not a question." "Yes, I saw the shot come from there." She looked at the Winchester on Ren's back. "That was you." "Yes." Cora absorbed this, looked at the cup in her hands. "You cut the rope, not the noose. The rope around my wrists." "The noose was decorative at that point," Ren said. "Your hands were the problem." Something crossed Cora's face that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't fully arrive, but it was there in the shape of it, in the muscles that almost moved. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Ren didn't answer. She turned to the old man, who had settled himself against the wall near the door near exits. She noticed the habit of a man who had spent his career going through them toward things other people were coming away from, and she crossed her arms and looked at him and said, "Tell me what you know. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out," he told her. His name was Aldous Prentice, and he had been a deputy U.S. Marshal for 19 years, working out of Albuquerque, and then out of Santa Fe, and then not at all. He had retired or been retired, the distinction blurred at the edges 4 years ago. He had spent the years since doing what men like him tended to do when the work stopped and the silence started. He had not done it well. He had started looking into Gareth Winslow 14 months ago, not because anyone asked him to, not because it was his job anymore, but because he had heard a name in a bar in Las Cruces, the name of a man who had died in a way that didn't add up, on a piece of land that seemed to always benefit someone else, and the old habit had moved in him, the 20-year habit of following the thing that didn't add up, and he had followed it north, to Harrow Bluff. The picture that assembled itself as he investigated was not complicated in its bones. Gareth Winslow had arrived in this part of New Mexico Territory in 1866. Nobody knew, or nobody admitted to knowing, where he had come from before that. He had arrived with money, not a lot, but enough and a gift for making himself useful to the people who held the actual levers of territory governance. Within 3 years, he had land. Within 5, he had influence. Within 10, he was the kind of man who sat at tables where decisions were made about water rights and grazing boundaries and tax assessments. By 1883, he owned, or effectively controlled, most of the habitable land within 12 miles of Harrow Bluff. Not because he was smart, though he wasn't stupid. Not because he was ruthless, though he was. But because he had understood early what most men in his position were slow to understand, the future of land in the American West was not cattle or silver or timber. It was the railroad. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway had been pushing its main line through New Mexico since 1878, Albuquerque in 1880, south through Rincon, west toward Tucson. And in the next 18 months, 18 to 24, depending on the surveyors and the weather and the particular politics of the territory, it was going to push north and west through a corridor that would pass, according to the most recent survey maps, Aldous had been able to obtain within 4 miles of Harrow Bluff, 4 miles from the town, directly through the land on the south and west sides of it. The land Winslow had spent 17 years accumulating. When the railroad came through, the land value would multiply in a way that defied the mathematics of ordinary commerce. Not double, not triple, 10 times, 15. Because the railroad didn't just bring people, it brought commerce, it brought settlement. It brought the civilizing machinery that transformed frontier scrub into profitable territory, and the men who owned the land that the railroad needed were going to be wealthy beyond the calculating of it. Winslow knew this. He had known it for years, and he had spent years making sure that when the railroad came, he would own what it needed. All of it. Every acre. Every deed. Most of the small landholders had already signed, some willingly, selling to Winslow at below-market prices because they needed the money now and didn't understand about the railroad or didn't believe it was coming or trusted Winslow the way you trust the water that's been in the well your whole life without thinking about what's upstream. Some signed because a visit from Fitch at an unexpected hour had convinced them that the certainty of a small loss now was better than the possibility of a larger loss later. A few held out. Vernon Devlin was one of them. Cora's father. He held 80 acres on the south slope, not much, dry and rocky, but positioned in a way that complicated the contiguous land block Winslow needed. Without it, there was a gap, a legal gap that could cause problems for the railroad deal, or at least for the timing of it. Winslow had tried the money. He had tried the visit from Fitch. He had tried the legal approach, a trumped-up charge, processed through the territorial court, in which Winslow had spent considerable money, and time installing a judge who understood priorities. Vernon Devlin had refused them all. He was not a brave man, particularly. He was simply a man who had one thing: that 80 acres, his father's land, the only thing between his family and working someone else's ground for the rest of their lives, and he could not make himself let it go. So Winslow built a gallows. He had invented a charge against Cora theft, specific and documented in the manner of documents that Winslow's attorney was paid to make convincing, and arrested her, and told Vernon Devlin, through an intermediary, that the charge would proceed to a swift judgment unless the deed was signed, and that the judgment, in the court of the Honorable Judge Emmett, would be swift, severe, and irreversible. The gallows was the exclamation point, the demonstration for everyone watching that Gareth Winslow had the authority and the will to do exactly what he said he would do. Wren listened to all of this. She did not interrupt. She had learned not to interrupt from her father, who had said, "Let a man finish. You'll learn more from the way he ends than from anything in the middle." She watched Aldous' face as he talked. She watched the parts of the story that cost him something, not the facts, but the way he carried them, the places where his voice changed, register almost imperceptibly, where the information became something other than professional assessment. Those places told you things. He knew more about Marshal Calloway than a retired deputy marshal doing a private investigation would have reason to know. He knew specifics, dates, conversations, the name of a particular trial, March 1879. She filed it, the way she filed everything, in the part of herself that was very cold and very patient, and had been cold and patient for 4 years. When he finished, the forge was quiet, except for the small sounds of iron cooling. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking at something irrelevant. Tio was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, watching Aldous with the particular expression he used, for things he hadn't decided about yet. Cora was still holding the cup. "The land adjacent to Devlin's 80 acres, Wren said. "Who else is holding out?" "2 other parcels. Mrs. Ingram to the north, widow, elderly. She won't last the winter regardless of Winslow. And a man called Rourke, who I believe is about to sign. So Devlin is the last real obstacle." Yes, and you came here because there was nobody else coming, Aldous said. And because I had a debt to pay. He said it simply, without decoration. The way a man states an arithmetic fact, this is what I owe, this is why I'm here. But the word debt sat in the air of Tio's forge in a way that was not simple at all, and Ren felt it the same way she felt the shape of a wrong stitch in a piece of fabric she was working on. You couldn't always see it, but your fingers knew. She was about to press on it when Tio spoke. He had been quiet long enough. Tio spoke when he had something to say, which meant when he spoke you paid attention. Prentice, he said. Not a greeting. Just the word. He was looking at Aldous with a slightly different quality of attention now. Aldous Prentice. Yes. Tio was quiet for another moment. His eyes moved to Ren, then back. You worked out of Santa Fe. For 6 years, yes. I heard that name, Tio said slowly, a while back. Different context. He paused. He looked at Ren again, held her gaze for a beat, and Ren felt the thing that had been waiting in her chest. Since the old man said, your father told me begin to move. Different context, she said. Her voice was level, controlled. What context? Tio didn't answer right away. He was being careful in the way that he was careful when he thought something might break. The trial. In 79. The one that took your father's badge. The silence in the forge became a different kind of silence. Cora looked up from her cup. Aldous did not move, did not look away, did not do any of the things a man does when he's calculating an exit. He simply stood by the door and took what was coming with both hands in plain sight, which told her something she didn't want it to tell her. Tell me the name, Ren said. She was looking at Tio, but asking Aldous. Aldous Prentice, Tio said quietly, was the witness. In that trial, the witness, Ren said. The main witness, Tio said. The one who testified that your father— I know what he testified, Ren said. She did. She had read the transcript. She had read it twice, once when she first obtained it, and once a year later when she was calm enough to understand everything in it, and not just the headline of it. She had memorized the relevant portions. She could recite them if asked. She turned to look at Aldous Prentice. He was still there, still in the same position, still with his hands at his sides and his hat pushed back, and his blue-gray eyes meeting hers without flinching, which was either courage or exhaustion, or some particular quality that lived at the intersection of them. The Colt was in her hand, before she had made a conscious decision to put it there. That was not unusual. There were decisions the body made that the mind was simply informed about afterward. You testified, she said, that my father was seen accepting a bribe from a land speculator in Las Cruces. You gave dates, you gave amounts, you gave details that only a credible witness would know. He said nothing. The court stripped his badge. He'd been a United States Marshal for 22 years. She let that sit for a moment. 22 years. The weight of it. He died 8 months later. Not of anything dramatic. He just stopped. Stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. Stopped finding reasons. You understand what I mean? Yes, Aldous said. A man who has been something his whole life stops being allowed to be that thing. And then, yes, and then he stops. Yes, the Colt was steady in her hand. She was not shaking. She was never shaking. That was the thing people didn't understand about being very angry, the real, settled, long-term kind of angry. The kind that had been sitting in you for 4 years, like a stone in still water you didn't shake. You went still. You became more yourself, not less. Everything unnecessary dropped away, and what was left was very clear and very simple. Give me a reason, she said. Cora made a sound somewhere behind her. Tio said her name once quietly. Aldous looked at her, straight and steady, and without appeal. I don't have one good enough, he said. Not for this room. Not today. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. You keep saying that. Her finger was on the guard, not the trigger. Still. Still on the guard. You're still thinking. Except she wasn't sure if she was thinking anymore, or if she was just giving the thought the shape of thinking so she could keep holding the gun without pulling it. What do you have that's good enough for any room? He reached into the inside of his coat, slowly, with 2 fingers and the motion of a man who knows exactly how that movement looks to a person holding a weapon and wants to demonstrate that he is not stupid. He took out an envelope. It was old, cream-colored once, now the yellowish gray of old paper in a coat pocket, sealed. Unsealed now, the flap tucked in rather than stuck. He held it out. Before you decide anything, he said, read that. She didn't take it. Not yet. What is it? A letter, he said. I've been carrying it for 4 years. It was given to me by a man I don't deserve to have trusted me with it." The forge was very quiet. "Who gave it to you?" she said. But she already knew. She had known since he said, "Your father told me on a street in Harrow Bluff at 6 in the morning." She had known and refused to know. And now she had arrived at the place where refusing to know was no longer an option available to her. "Daniel Calloway," Aldous said. "Your father? He gave it to me in October, 1879, 1 month before he died." The Colt in her hand, the envelope in his, the 4 years between her and the thing inside it. She did not take it yet. Outside, Harrow Bluff was doing what small towns do after something extraordinary has happened in their streets, going back to being ordinary. Putting the extraordinary away in the place where you put things that are too large to deal with right now. The dog had stopped barking. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere a child called out to someone and was answered. The world continuing. She became aware of Cora Devlin, still on the overturned crate, watching her with those steady, dark eyes that had memorized the faces of everyone who stood in the street and did nothing. Watching her the way someone watches a moment they know they will carry for a long time. She became aware of Tio against the far wall, who had known her for 4 years and had asked her, exactly once, about the marshal badge she wore on the inside of her coat where nobody could see it. She had not answered. He had never asked again. She became aware of Aldous Prentice, 63 years old, who had walked up the center of a street toward 5 armed men to keep something from happening that shouldn't happen, and who was now standing in a blacksmith's forge with an old letter in his outstretched hand and a woman's gun pointed at him, and was not, as far as she could tell, afraid. She lowered the Colt. She did not holster it. She lowered it, barrel toward the floor. That was all she could manage, and she was honest enough with herself to know it. "You," she said, "are going to tell me everything. Not just what you told me already. Everything, the parts that cost you. The parts you've been carrying. All of it." She looked at his face. "And then I'm going to decide." "Decide what?" he said. "Whether you're useful or whether you're a problem." Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, not anywhere near a smile, but something adjacent to it. The recognition of a way of thinking that was familiar. The way you recognize a word in a language you learned a long time ago but haven't spoken since. "That's what your father used to say," he said quietly. "About every man he worked with. Useful or a problem." "I know," she said. "He said it in front of me 100 times." She crossed the forge and picked up a 3-legged stool and set it down in front of him and sat on it and held the Colt in her lap, barrel still down, and looked at him. "Start talking," she said. "Leave nothing out this time." He looked at her for a moment. This woman who was 26 years old and had been carrying something for 4 years and had been on a roof since before dawn and had cut a rope from 60 yards and had not shot him when she had every reason to, and was now Sixsmith's forge at 7 in the morning with a Colt in her lap and her father's way of talking coming out of her mouth. He sat down across from her and he started talking. The things he said over the next hour changed the shape of the room. Not the physical room. Tio's forge remained what it was, iron and coal, and the morning light coming through the high windows at a slant, but the shape of the space between the people in it, the distances, the angles, the way each of them occupied their particular corner, and what they were to each other within it. He told her about Winslow, in more detail than before. The railroad deal, the specific numbers, the specific timeline, the specific people in Santa Fe, who were involved in ways that would be professionally embarrassing if they became public. The territorial judge, the lawyer, the 3 men in the land office who had been altering records in ways that were technically possible to detect and practically impossible to prosecute without the documentation that was currently locked in Winslow's office safe. He told her about Cora's father, about Vernon Devlin, who was not a complicated man but who was a stubborn one, and who had so far refused every approach Winslow had made because the 80 acres was his father's 80 acres, and there were places where stubbornness became the last form of dignity a man had, and Devlin had arrived at that place. Winslow had built the Gallows, not because he expected it to work, though it might, but because every week the deal was delayed, cost money, and the railroad's patience was not infinite. He needed pressure. He applied pressure, and then Aldous told her about Fitch. She listened to this part with particular care. Fitch's name was Graham Farrow. He had grown up in Albuquerque. His older brother Caleb had been 24 years old in the spring of 1870, working as a freighter out of a small operation on the south side of town. An operation that was, unfortunately, located 3 buildings down from a location where a man named Reyes Gutierrez was known to fence stolen property. And Gutierrez, in March 1870, had been the subject of a coordinated arrest operation by the U.S. Marshal's Office, led by Aldous Prentice, who was 30 years old and 6 years into his career, and very good at his job. Very good. And also, on one particular March morning, very certain. He had been certain the man coming out of the building was Gutierrez. He had been certain of the weapon in the man's hand, or what he had been certain was a weapon in the man's hand. He had been certain, in the way that certainty comes in the compressed second, before a decision that cannot be taken back, and he had fired. Caleb Farrow was dead before he hit the ground. He was carrying a length of iron pipe that he had apparently borrowed from a neighbor to fix something at the freight yard. The investigation that followed cleared Aldous Prentice of wrongful conduct. Tragic accident. Mistaken identity in a chaotic situation. No criminal liability. Graham Farrow, 12 years old when his brother died, had reached his own conclusion about liability, and he had carried it, quietly and without public expression, for 13 years, until Winslow had recruited him for exactly the kind of work that allowed him to operate in proximity to the man he had been looking for. Aldous had discovered this 3 months ago. He had found it in the way you find the thing you've been afraid to find by looking for something else and accidentally removing the cover from it. "He's going to come for you," Wren said. "I expect so. After this is over, if you're still standing." "That's probably about right." She looked at him. "And you're telling me this because you'll need to know it," he said. "For what comes next. And because you deserve to know that the man guarding Winslow's left side is doing it for reasons that are about me and not about you. And that distinction matters tactically." Wren sat with that for a moment. The information and the reason he'd given it, and the question of whether the reason was the real one or whether there was a layer underneath it that she couldn't see yet. She picked up the envelope. The handwriting on it was her father's. She would have known it anywhere, the same way you know a voice, not by analyzing it, but by something that happened before analysis, something immediate and certain and located in a part of you that doesn't use words. She had grown up watching that handwriting on reports and letters, and occasionally on notes tucked into her lunch pail that said things like, "Stay out of trouble today, and I'll show you something when I get home." She looked at the handwriting for a long time. Then she put the letter in her pocket. Not because she wasn't going to read it. She was. She would read it that night, alone, when there was enough distance between herself and everyone else that whatever it did to her face when she read it would be hers alone. But not here. Not now. Not in front of a man who had walked into this morning with a weight she was still measuring, and a story she was still hearing, all the way to the end of. "Winslow will move again," she said. "He'll reassess and he'll move again, and the next move will be worse because he'll be angry and because he has a timeline." "Yes. The documentation is in his office safe. Best I can determine, yes. So that's where we start." She looked at Tio. "You still have that set of pics?" Tio's expression suggested that the answer to this was yes, and that he had various feelings about being asked the question in front of a stranger. "He's not a stranger," she said. "He walked up the middle of that street." Tio absorbed this, reached behind a loose brick in the far wall, and produced a small leather roll. Wren nodded. She looked at Cora. The girl on the crate was watching her with the full, focused attention of someone who has decided to trust and is waiting to find out if that was the right call. "You can stay here," Wren told her. "Tio will keep you safe." "I don't want to stay here," Cora said. "Winslow might come for you again." "I know." Her chin was doing the same thing it had done on the platform. Up. Steady. The thing that Wren had first noticed about her and still couldn't quite look away from. "That's why I don't want to stay here." Wren looked at her for a moment. At the red rope marks on her wrists and the steadiness of her dark eyes and the cup of water she had stopped holding and set down somewhere in the past hour without Wren noticing. "Stay close," Wren said. "Do what I tell you when I tell you. If I say get down, you get down before you think about it." "Understood." Wren stood from the stool. She slid the Colt back into her holster, properly holstered it, the whole gesture, the finality of it, and she looked at Aldous Prentice. You and I are not settled, she said. You understand that? Yes, whatever that letter says. We're not settled. I understand. But Winslow is a problem that exists right now, and problems that exist right now take priority. She paused. My father's rule. Something moved across Aldous' face. Through it, maybe. Like light through water, touching things below the surface without disturbing them. Yes, he said quietly. He had a lot of rules. He had a few good ones, she said. She walked to the door of the forge. Outside, Harrow Bluff was fully awake now, going about its ordinary morning in the careful way of a town that has seen something it is pretending not to have seen. The sun was clear of the ridge. The red light was gone, replaced by the flat, honest light of full morning that showed everything as it was, without the mercy of atmosphere. She stood in the doorway and looked at the street. Somewhere from the south end of town, in a large house that had been built larger than anything else around it, Gareth Winslow was reassessing. She could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not see it, not hear it, but feel the pressure shift. He was angry. Anger was always there in men like Winslow, underneath the surface functionality of them, available to be activated, and it had just been activated. And an angry man with a timeline was a specific kind of dangerous. He had built a gallows in 48 hours. He had put a 17-year-old girl on it in front of 60 people. He had done this in daylight, in public, because he was a man who had spent 17 years consolidating enough power in this territory that he had stopped being afraid of what witnesses saw. Someone had just reminded him that witnesses existed, that a rifle on a rooftop existed, that he was not, in fact, unchecked. He was going to check back very soon. She had a retired deputy marshal who had ruined her father's life and was trying to pay a debt. She had a blacksmith with a set of picks. She had a 17-year-old girl who kept her chin up on a gallows platform. She had her father's Winchester and her grandfather's Colt and 4 years of accumulated patience that was, right now, beginning to turn into something else. Something with direction and intention and a shape she could almost see. She stepped out of the doorway, into the morning light. Behind her, she heard the others follow. The letter stayed in her pocket all day, which was a choice. Everything is a choice. Her father taught her that too. Inaction is a choice, May. Waiting is a choice. The only thing that isn't a choice is time, and even time you can decide how to spend. She spent the rest of that morning moving, not running, not hiding, moving with purpose through a town that was pretending not to watch her, through a town that had stood in the street 2 hours ago and done nothing, and was now carrying that nothing around like a stone in a boot, felt with every step impossible to ignore, not quite painful enough to stop for. She understood them. She didn't forgive them, but she understood. Fear was not a simple thing. Fear in a town with one road in and one road out, and a man like Winslow sitting at the center of it like a spider who had been there long enough that people had stopped seeing the web. That kind of fear had weight to it, texture. It pressed down on people in ways that made them smaller than they wanted to be. She had been small, too, once, 4 years ago. Standing in a courtroom in Santa Fe, 22 years old, watching a man named Aldous Prentice read from a prepared statement in a flat voice, while her father sat at a table and did not look at her, and his 22 years of service to the United States government got taken apart word by careful word. She had been very small that day. She was not small now. The first thing she did was walk the south end of town. T.O. on her left, half a step behind. Aldous on her right. Cora she had left at the forge with specific instructions and a backup plan she had outlined in 60 seconds, and which Cora had absorbed without asking a single unnecessary question, which confirmed a judgment Wren had made about the girl's particular quality of intelligence. She walked slowly, like someone with no destination, like someone who had decided to take the morning air and had no thoughts worth noticing. She was noticing everything. Winslow's house was at the south end of Allen Road, the main thoroughfare of Harrow Bluff, though calling it a thoroughfare was generous for a packed dirt street with a hardware store on one side and a dry goods operation that doubled as the post office on the other. The house itself was the only two-story structure in town. White painted timber with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Big windows. The kind of house that had been built to be looked at, to be read as a statement. I am permanent, I am established, I have the resources to maintain paint. The office was at the back of the house. She knew this because Aldous had told her, and she had confirmed it by the angle of the lamp visible through the rear window. The 3 evenings she had stayed late at the shop with the lights low, watching. She had been watching Winslow's property for 2 weeks before this morning, not because she had a specific plan, but because watching cost nothing, and ignorance was expensive. 2 men on the porch now where there had been. One before this morning, both armed. Holsters worn loose in the way of men who expected to draw today, rather than just carrying as a formality. The alley on the west side of the house was maybe 4 feet wide, too narrow for a horse, manageable for a person moving carefully. She walked past the house at the same steady pace she had started with, did not look at the men on the porch. The men on the porch looked at her. She felt it. The held attention of men who have been told to watch for something and are applying that instruction to everything that moves. She turned the corner at the end of Allen Road and kept walking. 2 guards, Aldous said quietly. I counted. Tonight? Tio said from the left. Tonight, she said. Late. After the second lamp goes out. She had timed Winslow's schedule over the 2 weeks she had been watching. Not perfectly. You could never time a man perfectly, because men were inconsistent in ways they weren't even aware of, but well enough. The study lamp went out between 11:30 and midnight. The bedroom lamp 20 minutes after. He had guards overnight, but they were positioned on the premise that any threat would come through the front or back door, not through a 4-foot alley and a ground floor window. She turned north and headed back toward Tio's forge, and she was going over angles and timelines and contingencies in her mind, when Aldous said something that interrupted all of it. There's something else, he said. About Vernon Devlin. She looked at him. He signed, Aldous said. Last night. Before the gallows this morning. He signed the deed over to Winslow. She stopped walking. Tio took 2 more steps and stopped. Then, why, she said, was Cora on the platform this morning? Because Winslow hadn't gotten word yet when Fitch set it up, Aldous said. Or because it didn't matter. Or both. Or both. She stood in the middle of the street and processed this. The gallows built as demonstration. The deed already signed. The leverage already exercised. The girl on the platform, already superfluous to the actual transaction, still there because Winslow's machinery had been set in motion and nobody had told it to stop, or because Winslow had decided to let it run anyway, because the demonstration had value regardless of the specific case, or because Winslow had stopped thinking of Cora Devlin as a person and had started thinking of her as a resource, and resources got used. She started walking again. Does Cora know? She said. I don't believe so. She filed this under things that would need to be addressed later. Things that were terrible and true and had to be handled at the right moment and not before. She walked into Tio's forge and sat down and started planning. Cora was where she'd left her, not sitting anymore. Standing near the cold forge, her arms crossed over her chest, her face arranged in an expression that Wren had not seen on her before and took a moment to identify. It was the expression of someone who has been thinking about something they don't want to think about and has arrived, through the unwilling process of following every implication to its end, at a conclusion they would rather not have reached. My father signed, Cora said. Not a question. Last night, apparently, Wren said. Cora absorbed this. The expression on her face didn't change, which was somehow worse than if it had. He didn't tell me. No. He had 2 weeks to tell me. He could have told me any time in 2 weeks. He chose. She stopped. Started again. He chose not to tell me. Wren didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. Sometimes the only honest response to something terrible was silence. Not because silence was comfortable, but because it was accurate. So the gallows this morning, Cora said slowly. That was already after. It was after he signed. That's what we believe. Yes. Which means Winslow put me on that platform knowing the deal was done. Not to pressure my father, just to send a message, Wren said, to the next person who thinks about holding out. Cora was quiet for a long time. Outside, something moved across the sun cloud or hawk, impossible to tell from inside, and the quality of light through the forge's high windows shifted for a moment, dimmed, and then returned. In that brief dimming, Cora's face changed. Not visibly, not in any way that someone not paying close attention would have caught. But Wren was paying close attention. Something in her settled. The way something settles in a person when they have been holding out hope for a particular outcome, and the hope has been finally and definitively removed. It was not relief. It was not despair. It was the peculiar flatness that comes from certainty after uncertainty, even when certainty is worse. All right, Cora said. Just those two words. All right, as if some internal negotiation had concluded, and she had arrived at terms she could live with. What do you need me to do? She said. Ren looked at her for a moment. This girl, this 17-year-old girl with rope marks on her wrists, and a father who had chosen not to tell her something that was very much hers to know, who had stood on a gallows platform with her chin up and her eyes open, who was now standing in a blacksmith's shop asking what she could do. Tonight, Ren said, I need a distraction at the front of Winslow's property, between 11 and 11:30. Nothing dramatic. Someone walking past, engaging one of the guards in conversation long enough for them to be looking north while we come in from the west. I can do that. It involves risk. I was on a gallows 3 hours ago, Cora said. I've recalibrated my sense of risk, which was Ren almost smiled. Almost. Stay close to Aldous when it's time, she said. Do exactly what he says when he says it. Fine, Cora said. Good, said Ren. And then they spent the rest of the afternoon planning. There was, in the hours between morning and evening, a kind of provisional ordinary life that reasserted itself in the spaces of the planning. Tio made food beans and dried beef and bread that was 2 days old but still food, and they ate it without ceremony, standing or sitting on whatever was available. And the conversation moved between the operational and the ordinary in the way that it does when people are preparing to do something dangerous and the mind keeps seeking relief in small, mundane things. Tio, at one point, showed Cora how the picks worked on a practice lock he kept for the purpose. She was better at it than expected, which Tio noted without comment, but with a slight upward adjustment of his assessment of her. Aldous cleaned his weapon. A Smith & Wesson Schofield, 0.45, older than any of them would have guessed by looking at it, because it was maintained with the obsessive care of a man who understood that a gun was not a symbol or a statement, but a tool and tools needed to work. He broke it down and cleaned each component and reassembled it with the kind of unhurried precision that spoke of 1,000 repetitions. Ren watched him do this without appearing to watch. His hands were steady. The right one, his dominant hand, showed old scarring along the thumb and forefinger. The kind of scarring that came from rope or from wire or from handling something sharp, many times over many years. He had been a working lawman for a long time. Whatever he was now, that was still in there, in the steadiness of the hands, in the way he sat with his back to a solid surface and his face to the room, in the way he had walked up the center of that street. You don't stop being what you spent 20 years being. Not entirely. It changes its shape, but it doesn't leave. She thought about her father. She did not think about the letter. Cora fell asleep on the crate at some point. Just dropped off without preamble, mid-sentence, the way young people fall asleep when their body overrules their mind's objections. Ren watched her sleep for a moment, the girl's face completely different in sleep. All the chin-up steadiness relaxing into something younger and less defended, and then looked away. Aldous noticed her looking. She's gonna be all right, he said quietly. Not about tonight. About all of it. You don't know that. No, he said. But I've seen a lot of people in a lot of difficult situations, and some of them have what it takes, and some of them don't. And I know what it looks like when someone has it. She's 17. Your father was 17 when he first pinned on a badge, Aldous said. Junior deputy. Colfax County, 1,856. Youngest in the county's history. She looked at him. How do you know that? He told me. He paused. We worked together for 3 years, before... Another pause. The word before doing the work of a much longer sentence. Before you destroyed his career, she said. Before that, he said. Quietly. No defensiveness in it. Just the word and what it meant, and the acknowledgement that it meant that. She looked at the floor of the forge. The packed earth, centuries of iron filings worked into it. The whole surface slightly darker at the center where the heat had always been highest. What was he like? She said. The question coming out before she had decided to ask it. Aldous was quiet for a moment. She watched him consider, not whether to answer, but how. The difference between choosing your words and censoring your thoughts. Honest, he said. Rigorously honest, in a way that made some people uncomfortable. He would tell you things you didn't want to hear in a tone that didn't soften them, and some people mistook that for coldness. It wasn't. He was a man who had decided that honesty was a form of respect, that lying to someone, even to spare them discomfort, was a small way of thinking less of them. So he didn't do it. She already knew this. She had known this her whole life. But there was a difference between knowing something about your father from living with it and hearing someone describe it from the outside, from the perspective of someone who had worked beside it, been on the receiving end of it, understood it as a professional quality rather than a personal one. He was also funny, Aldous said, when people weren't expecting it. That dry way of his. He used to call it late-arriving humor, she said, before she could stop herself. Said it was the only kind worth having. Something happened in Aldous's face. The kind of thing that happens when you recognize something, and the recognition costs you something. Yes, he said. He said that to me. Exactly that. The forge was quiet between them. You were his friend, she said. I was. He said it simply. I was his friend, and I... He stopped. Looked at his hands. I want you to understand something. When Winslow came to me, when he showed me what he had, the evidence of the Albuquerque incident, I was. He pressed his lips together, reconsidered his architecture. I was not brave enough. That's the plainest way I can say it. I had the information, and I had the choice, and I was not brave enough to make the right one. And then it was made, and I understood what I'd done, and I couldn't unmake it. She said nothing. That's not an excuse, he said. I'm not offering it as one. I'm offering it because I think you deserve to know the size of the cowardice. Not small. Not a moment of confusion. A clear choice, clearly made in the wrong direction. She looked at him, this old man, this tired 63-year-old man, who had walked up the center of a street at 6 in the morning toward 5 armed men. Not because it was safe, not because it was smart, because something needed doing and nobody else was doing it. And the debt had been sitting in him for 4 years and getting heavier. She thought about what that weight did to a person over 4 years, whether it was punishment enough, whether punishment was the right framework at all. She didn't reach a conclusion. She hadn't expected to. The letter stays in my pocket, she said, until I'm ready. Of course. Not your call. No, he said, it's not. And that was all they said about it, until much later. Night came to Harrow Bluff, the way it comes to high desert suddenly and completely, with a quality of darkness that flatter country doesn't produce. The sky above the New Mexico territory in September was enormous and clear and full of stars in quantities that men from the east always found slightly disturbing, as if there were too many, as if the sky were trying to tell you something about scale that you weren't prepared to hear. She liked the dark, had always liked it. Her father had taken her camping as a child, out past the fence line of whatever county he was working in, and she had learned to navigate by starlight before she was 10. Learned the constellations not as mythological stories, but as landmarks. Practical geography. That one's north. That one tells you the hour. That one means rain in 3 days if you know what to look for. At 11:15 she moved. Tio first. He went wide around the back of the block, taking the route they had walked twice in the afternoon at slow pace, so that it was in his body as well as his mind. He was carrying the pick set, and a small lantern shuddered on 3 sides, so its light was a narrow bar rather than a glow. Tio moved quietly for a man of his size. Quietly, and without hurry, one of his gifts. Cora and Aldous went up the main street at a pace that was easy and unconspicuous. Cora slightly ahead, playing the part of a young woman walking home after an evening at a friend's, which was the kind of thing a guard sees and registers as background. Aldous 10 feet behind, walking the slightly uneven walk of a man who was perhaps not entirely sober and not going anywhere important. Another piece of background. Wren went through the alley, 4 feet wide. She went sideways for the first 12 feet, where it narrowed, then forward as it widened again near the back of Winslow's property. The ground underfoot was packed earth, and she moved across it in the soft-soled boots she had changed into after supper, not her everyday boots, not the ones with the hard heel that could be heard, and the only sounds she made were the ones she decided to make, which were none. She heard Cora before she saw the effect. A sound from the front of the property, not loud, but present, the particular sound of a young woman who has maybe had more to drink than she intended, and has encountered someone she knows, and finds this fact delightful. The performance was good, better than good. It was convincing in a way that said Cora Devlin had observed people closely for 17 years, and had learned from what she observed. The light from the east window moved, tilted slightly, someone inside adjusting position to look toward the front. Wren moved. She covered the last 15 feet of alley in 6 seconds and pressed herself against the back wall of the house below the west window. Low, below the sill. The sounds from the front, continued Cora's voice, rising and falling, in the patterns of pleasant nothing conversation. Whoever she had engaged responding in monosyllables that were becoming less monosyllabic as she continued. The girl was good. She found the window latch through the partially open frame and worked it without sound. The window came open. She went through it. The room on the other side was a storage space. Crates and barrels and the smell of paper and dry goods and old wood. She waited inside the window for 30 seconds, letting her eyes adjust to the dark. Within dark of an interior room, she crossed the room by touch and memory and put her hand on the far door and listened. Voices. Muffled. Not from the guards from above. The second floor. Winslow was awake. She had not expected this. His pattern had been consistent. Lamp out by midnight, and it was not yet 11:30. She revised in real time the way her father had taught her. Your plan is your starting point, not your script. The moment you make it a script, the world rewrites it and you're reading from the wrong page. She listened longer. 2 voices. Winslow's lower, deliberate, and one she didn't recognize. A man's voice, younger by the sound of it. Something official in the register, the vocabulary of paperwork. She caught fragments. The word survey, the word schedule, the phrase by the end of the month. The railroad man. He had a railroad representative in the house at 11:30 at night, which meant the timeline was not 60 days, which meant the timeline was days, not weeks, days. She moved to the office door. The office was on the ground floor. She moved through the dark with her right hand trailing the wall, keeping contact without pressing, just a fingertip's worth of guidance. The parlor was empty. The passage was empty. The office door was closed. She stood outside it for 10 seconds. Heard nothing from within. Opened the door. Tio was already there. He had come in from the back. There was a back door she had not been able to examine closely from outside, and he had apparently found a way through it that she was going to ask him about later, and he was crouched in front of the safe, with the picks set open on the floor beside him and the narrow lantern clipped to his coat collar in a way that directed its thin beam exactly where his hands were. He looked up when she came in. "Window," he said. "Storage room," she said. Winslow's awake. "Second floor. Don't make noise." Have I ever made noise? She couldn't argue with this. She moved to the desk while Tio worked. She went through it methodically. What you're looking for in a desk is not always what you think you're looking for. You're looking for the thing that doesn't fit. The document that's been read too many times. The letter filed in the wrong place. The page blotted incompletely. She found 3 things. The first was a letter from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, dated 8 days ago, confirming a meeting in Albuquerque on September 28, 14 days from now. She read it twice and tucked it inside her vest. The second was a ledger page listing names and dollar amounts. She recognized 4 of them as Harrow Bluff landholders. The amounts were not the amounts shown in the public transfer records. They were significantly lower, which meant the difference had gone somewhere, and that somewhere was a separate accounting. She tucked it beside the letter. The third thing was smaller. A telegraph slip, the yellow paper of territory telegraph offices. Dated 3 days ago. Sent from Santa Fe. She read it. Read it again. Felt the cold that moved through her have nothing to do with the September night air. The telegraph slip read, "Prentice found your Callaway girl Harrow. Bluff. Name Ren Callaway. Shop on Main. Confirmed ID as discussed. Sent from Santa Fe. Sent 3 days ago. Sent to Harrow Bluff." She was still thinking about it when Tio said quietly, from the corner open, the contents of the Winslow safe were not, in themselves, spectacular. Money. Currency, mostly in denominations that suggested it had been assembled from multiple sources. A stack of document folders, leather-bound with tabs. A small locked box, secondary, which Tio opened with a single pick in under a minute. The locked box held 2 things. A deed, dated 2 years ago, for a property in California, a ranch outside of Paso Robles in San Luis Obispo County, transferred to a name that was not Gareth Winslow, and a set of identity documents. Complete. Well made. The kind that cost money and took time and suggested extensive preparation. He was planning to disappear, she said. Yes, Tio said. Not in 60 days. No. She set the identity documents aside and picked up the folders. The first folder contained the land transfer records, the altered ones. Every transaction Winslow had conducted with the landholders of Harrow Bluff over 17 years, with handwritten notations in the margins that showed the difference between the recorded price and the actual price paid. The notations were in Winslow's own hand, which was either arrogance or the kind of compulsive record-keeping that overtakes men who deal in large, complicated dishonesty and need to track it precisely for their own purposes even as they conceal it from everyone else. The second folder contained correspondence, letters from Judge Emmett of the Territorial Court, referencing specific cases and specific outcomes and specific amounts. The letters were careful, legally careful, in the way of letters written by a man who knows they could be produced in evidence but expects they won't be. That trust was now, standing in an office in Harrow Bluff at 11:45 at night, a liability. The third folder was thinner than the others. 3 documents, not stacked neatly, but arranged as if they had been handled recently, picked up and put down, picked up again, the way you handle something you keep returning to. The top document was a wanted poster, old, the paper brown at the edges, the ink slightly faded. From the state of Texas, Webb County Sheriff's Office, dated May 1865. The name on the poster was not Gareth Winslow. It was Warren Gidd's. The description was precise. Height, weight, hair color, a specific scar on the right forearm from a knife wound. The charges were robbery, assault, and murder, 3 counts of the last. Laredo, Texas. A bank, 3 people dead. One of them a deputy sheriff named Samuel Cole. She had found this, a version of this, in the legal records Aldous had assembled. The name he hadn't been certain about. The crime he had been able to trace only partially. Here was the whole of it. Second document. A letter, handwritten, in a different hand from any she had seen in the rest of the office. Formal, legal in structure. Addressed to Gareth Winslow by that name. In care of an address in Santa Fe, dated December 4/14, 1872. The letter was from a United States Marshal. The letter stated, in measured professional language, that the writer had become aware of certain information regarding the identity and prior criminal history of the man known as Gareth Winslow of Harrow Bluff, New Mexico Territory, and that an investigation had been opened, that the writer intended to pursue the matter through proper channels, that the writer believed justice for the victims of the Laredo incident remained an active obligation of the law, regardless of the years elapsed. And the letter noted that the writer had visited this area in September of that year and had found it to be land worth, holding a phrase that suggested he intended to return, that he considered this his ground to cover his responsibility. The letter was signed. Marshal Daniel Calloway, Santa Fe office, December 14, 1872. She had to read the signature 3 times. Not because she didn't recognize it, because recognizing it meant something that her mind was taking a moment to fully assemble. Her father had known. Her father had found Winslow had found Warren Gidd 7 years before Aldous had started investigating. He had been building the case for 7 years, from 1872 to 1879, when he had been stripped of his badge and his ability to pursue it. 7 years of work, 7 years of evidence that died with his career. And Winslow had kept the letter, had kept it in a folder he picked up and put down repeatedly, because he needed to see it. Because men who do terrible things to other men sometimes need to see the evidence of it, to hold it, to remind themselves that the threat was real and they had neutralized it. Third document. She unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn, careful, detailed in the way of a man who had precise spatial intelligence. It showed the land around Harrow Bluff, the roads, the ridge lines, the watercourses, the property boundaries. Properties were labeled with names. Her eyes found Devlin almost immediately. And then 3 properties north, a property labeled in her father's handwriting, the same handwriting from the letter with a single word, Calloway. She turned the map over. On the back, in her father's hand, survey conducted September 1872. Land identified as potential site for future family residence. Good water, south-facing slope. Worth holding. He had been here, physically. He had walked the land near Harrow Bluff. He had thought about it in terms of the future worth holding, future family residence. The same year he wrote the letter warning Winslow that justice was coming. He had also been planning what came after. Planning for a place where, once the work was done, a life could be built. She folded the map carefully and put it with the other documents she was carrying. She took the wanted poster. She left the identity documents and the California deed in the safe with specific thought and specific reason. If those disappeared, Winslow would know someone had been in the safe. If they were still there, he would not know what had been taken. She closed the safe. She moved back through the dark house the way she had come, through the connecting passage, through the parlor, into the storage room, through the window, into the 4-foot alley, along the wall, into the street. Aldous was where she had expected him to be, in the shadow of the hardware store across the street, positioned to see the front of the property and the south end of the alley simultaneously. He moved to join her when she appeared. "Clear?" he said. "Clear. Get Cora." She walked north without looking back. They gathered in the forge at midnight. 4 people in the dark, the forge cold, a single lantern in the center. Wren laid the documents on the workbench one by one. The land transfer records with Winslow's own notations, the judge's letters, the railroad correspondence, the letter from her father, the wanted poster. She put them out slowly, like laying cards on a table, like each one was a specific statement. Nobody spoke while she laid them out. When she was done, she stepped back. Teo looked at the documents for a long time. He picked up the wanted poster and read it and set it down. Cora looked at the land transfer records and found her family's name and was very still for a moment. Aldous looked at the letter from Daniel Calloway and did not move for so long that she wondered if he was breathing. He knew since 1872, Wren said. He had been building the case for 7 years when she started again. When the case was ended, Aldous set the letter down with care. The care of someone handling something that belongs to someone else. "I didn't know," he said. "I knew he was investigating land fraud. I didn't know the full extent. He kept the Gids connection separate. He didn't share it with me. Maybe he knew you were compromised," Cora said. It was a blunt thing to say. True and blunt, which were not always the same thing, but were tonight. Aldous looked at her. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe he was protecting it. Evidence that only one person knows about is harder to suppress. If I didn't know, I couldn't be used to get to it." Wren looked at the documents, at the letter with her father's signature, at the wanted poster with a name he had known about for 11 years. "He was careful," she said, quietly, almost to herself. "He was very careful." "He was," Aldous said. "And they still got him." "Yes." The word carrying everything that needed to be said about that. She looked at Aldous. "You told Winslow his schedule, his routes, the times he would be in specific places." "Yes." "And Winslow used that too? The ambush, the false witnesses?" "Yes." She had read the full transcript of the trial. She knew the mechanism. Winslow had used Aldous' information to construct an alibi that put Calloway in a location he would not have been if he was the honest man the previous 22 years suggested he was. Other witnesses had been found or made. The case was not complicated. It was straightforward corruption, bought and paid for. "The evidence I took tonight," she said. "The land transfer records. The judge's letters. Is it enough?" Aldous looked at the documents. The look of a man with 20 years of professional assessment, applying itself to a specific problem. "For Winslow," he said, "yes." With the wanted poster establishing his identity as Warren Gids, the land fraud documentation, and the judicial corruption letters, yes. It's enough for a federal case. U.S. Marshal's Office, bypassing the territory entirely. How long to get a U.S. Marshal from Albuquerque? 4 days' ride. We have 14 days before his meeting with the railroad. Then we're not short on time, Aldous said. But there's a variable. "Fitch," she said. "Fitch," he confirmed. She reached into her vest pocket. She took out the telegraph slip she had found on the desk, the one she had read and read again in the dark office, and had been carrying in her mind ever since. She set it on the workbench in front of Aldous. "Before we go any further," she said, "explain this." He looked down at it. "Read it." His face doing the thing that faces do when they encounter something they were hoping not to encounter yet. Aldous looked at the slip for a long moment. Teo was very still. Cora looked between them. Wren waited. She had learned waiting from her father. Let a man find his words. Rushing him only gets you the ones he had ready, not the real ones. "Who sent it?" Aldous said. Not a question he knew. You tell me, she said. A man called Reardon. He's done work for me before. Finding people. Information. I asked him to locate you after I started investigating Winslow, because I had the letter and I needed to know where to bring it. So the telegraph goes to you in Harrow Bluff, she said slowly. 3 days ago. Confirming my location. By name. Yes. And you've been in Harrow Bluff for how long? A pause. 6 weeks, he said. She thought about this. About the 6 weeks. About Winslow, who had extensive contacts in this territory and had been in the information business for 17 years, who monitored communications through Harrow Bluff, because monitoring communications was the kind of thing men like Winslow did as a matter of course. The telegraph office in Harrow Bluff, she said. He understood immediately where she was going. She could see it happen in his face, the blood draining from somewhere already spare. Winslow has someone in the telegraph office, he said. He has someone in everything, she said. He would have seen the telegram. Yes. He would have known your name. Your location. Yes. The forge was very quiet. The gallows this morning, Aldous said. His voice different now. Lower. Heavier. It wasn't only about Devlin's land. It was about me, she said. Getting me to show myself. Getting me to come out of whatever cover I'd been keeping. She thought about how much of this morning's operation had been Winslow's plan, and how much had been her response to it. The ratio was uncomfortable. He knew who I was before this morning, she said. It appears so. And you, she said carefully, did not think to tell me that you had been located by telegraph, that anyone in Harrow Bluff might have seen that message. I thought the risk was low, he said. You thought wrong, she said. Flat clean, no heat. In it. That's the second time your judgment has been wrong about something that affected my father's family. I need you to understand that I'm keeping count. He held her gaze. Understood, he said. Winslow knows who I am, she said, turning back to the workbench. So the cover is completely gone. There's no going back to quiet seamstress on Main Street. Everything we do from here happens with him knowing he's looking for me specifically. She began organizing the documents. We need to get these to a U.S. Marshal. Albuquerque. 4 days ride, which means someone leaves tonight. I'll go, Aldous said immediately. You go with Tio, she said. 2 riders. Different routes for the first 20 miles, joining at the Mescalero Road. Tio looked at his forge, at the tools, at the particular life assembled in this building. He looked at it without sentiment and nodded. Tonight, Rin said. What about you, Cora said. I stay. Winslow knows who you are. Yes. She looked at the girl, which means if I leave, he knows the document run has started. He can intercept, delay, redirect. But if I'm here visible, present his attention stays here. You're making yourself the target, Cora said. On purpose. I'm being the thing he's looking for, she said. While Tio and Aldous move. It's extremely complicated, Cora said. You're going to be alone. I'll have you. Cora absorbed this. I'm not. You kept a guard talking for 20 minutes tonight while 3 people moved behind him, Rin said. You didn't flinch. You didn't overperform. You read the situation, and you adjusted in real time. I know what useful looks like. A pause. Also, Rin said, Tio can't take you north without explaining you, and explaining you puts questions on the road that could reach Winslow. You're better here. That's the practical reason, Cora said. The first one was a compliment. The first one was an assessment, Ren said. Don't confuse them. Cora almost smiled again. Close to it. The shape of it without the completion. All right, she said. A decision arrived at by following the logic to its end. All right. Tio and Aldous left an hour before dawn. Tio left with the particular efficiency of a man who has thought about what he cannot take and made peace with it. He banked the forge, secured the building, left things in an order that suggested he expected to return. Aldous left with the documents in a saddlebag and a face that was doing several things at once. He came to Ren before he mounted. He didn't say what he might have said. She gave him credit for that. Instead, he said, 4 days there. 2, 3 more to get the marshal moving. Call it 10 days at the outside. 14 until his railroad meeting, she said. We'll be back before then. He paused. Read the letter. She said nothing. When you're ready, he said. But soon. There are things in it that... He stopped. Just read it. When you can. He mounted and rode south without looking back, which was the right choice. and she watched the dark swallow him and stood in the cold pre-dawn air of September in the high desert with a 17-year-old girl beside her and a town around her that was full of people who were afraid and evidence of a criminal empire locked in her vest pocket. And somewhere to the south, a man named Gareth Winslow Warren Gids, who knew her name and was awake at 11:30 making plans with railroad men. She felt, in this moment, exactly and precisely like her father's daughter. She did not know if that was comfort or burden. Maybe both. Maybe that was always what it was. The next 2 days were a particular kind of war. Not the kind with guns. The visible war was still ahead. What happened in the 36 hours after Tio and Aldous rode north was the invisible kind, the war of positioning and information, and the management of perception, which her father had always said was harder than the visible kind. Because in the invisible kind, you never knew if you were winning until it was too late to change the outcome. She went back to the shop. She opened it. She sat at the sewing machine in the front window, and she worked. She had 3 commissions outstanding. She completed 2 of them. She made coffee. She ate a lunch she couldn't taste. She watched the street. Harrow Bluff watched her back, but sideways. Because she had been Wren Calloway, seamstress, quiet and capable and unremarkable, for 4 years. And now there was a gallows that had been built, and a shot that had come from a roof, and a girl who had been saved. And the whole town knew that these things were connected, but nobody had officially connected them. Harrow Bluff was doing what it did, looking sideways, maintaining plausible uncertainty. She let them. Fitch walked past the shop at 2 in the afternoon. Walked past. Not stopped. Not looked in. Just walked past at the particular pace of a man who is noting a location and not wanting to appear to be noting it. She was looking at her sewing when he passed. She had seen him peripherally. She had the exact measurement of his pace, his direction, his posture. He was on duty, she could tell by the coat, the one he wore when he was working. She had observed him enough over 4 weeks to have catalogued the distinctions. So he knew where she was. Winslow was doing his own noting and patience-having, which told her he was not moving yet. He was watching. He was waiting to see what she did before deciding what to do about her. Which was smart. Which she respected as smart. The way you can respect an adversary's intelligence without respecting the adversary. She had her own patience. She had been practicing it for 4 years. She kept sewing. Cora appeared at 3, carrying a basket that made her look like someone running errands. She came in and set the basket on the counter and looked at Wren. Anything, Wren said. Fitch went to the telegraph office at noon, Cora said. He was in there for 20 minutes. He came out with a piece of paper. Sending or receiving. The operator wouldn't say. But the operator looked. She thought about the word. Worried. He's already worried, Wren said. He's been worried for 3 years. Cora sat down on the chair beside the door that customers used when they were waiting. It gave you a view of the street through the front window that looked casual and wasn't. She had figured that out, Wren realized, without being told. Good instincts. They kept emerging, these instincts, like spring water finding its level. My father came by the forge this morning, Cora said, looking for me. Wren stopped sewing, just for a moment. What happened? Tio was gone, obviously. Mrs. Hester next door told him she hadn't seen me since yesterday morning. Good. He looked. Cora was quiet for a moment. Her voice had a particular quality now that it hadn't had yesterday. Today she had processed the betrayal and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. He looked scared, she said. Genuinely scared. Not for himself. For me. Wren waited. I know what he did, Cora said. I'm not ready to. I don't know what I am. But I saw his face. She looked at the window. He loves me. He just loves the land more. The accuracy of this. The brutal accuracy of it, stated without self-pity, in the flat voice of someone who has arrived at a truth they would rather have avoided. Some men, Wren said, can only hold so much at once. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, she said. It's supposed to be true. A pause. My father was the opposite, Wren continued. Before she could stop herself, things mattered to him. Land and money and position. They were nothing. He could walk away from all of it, without looking back. But people, the people he was responsible for, the ones who needed protecting, that he couldn't let go of, and the one who needed him to stay home, Cora said quietly. Wren looked at her. Cora shrugged. A man who can't let go of the people who need protecting leaves the people at home. A pause. That's not a judgment. Just also true, young. 17 years old and also true. Yes, Wren said. Also true. That evening, she sent Cora to have supper with Mrs. Hester and told her to come back at 9. She wanted the shop to herself. Not for long, just for long enough. She locked the front door. She sat down at the table in the back room, and she put the envelope on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a long time. The handwriting. The envelope worn soft at the corners from 4 years in the inside pocket of an old man's coat. The flap tucked in, not sealed, meaning he had opened it at some point. Read it. Put it away. Carried it. She thought about Aldous carrying this letter for 4 years. Opening it and reading it and putting it back. The weight of that. The particular purgatory of carrying someone's forgiveness without having delivered it. Of being in possession of a thing you owed and not being able to pay it because you couldn't find the person it was owed to. She thought about her father writing it a month before he died, knowing he must have known that the 8 months had done what they had done and what came next was not recovery. Knowing it and choosing to write this rather than something else. She reached forward and took the letter out of the envelope. 2 pages. His handwriting, which she knew better than her own. Slightly worse than usual, the hand of a man who had been ill, who was conserving energy, for whom each word was costing something, but clear. Her father had always been clear. She read it. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, the same folds, and put it back in the envelope. She sat at the table for a long time after that. The water in the pot on the stove had boiled and cooled. The sounds of Harrow Bluff at night came through the walls. Not loud, not particularly interesting. The ordinary sounds of a small town going to sleep. She did not cry. She had not cried in 4 years. Not about this. Not about her father. It was not that she had been saving it. It was that grief, for some people, did not take the form of tears. It took the form of everything else. The way you moved, the things you decided, the patience you built, and the accuracy you maintained, and the roof you climbed up onto before dawn to be ready for something you couldn't name but felt coming. All of that had been her crying. She sat with the letter in her pocket and the documents in her vest and the map in her mind, and she understood for the first time what she had been doing in this town for 4 years. Not hiding, not waiting, being here, in the place he had thought about, on the ground he had walked, close to the thing he had been building toward. She had not known that consciously, but the body knows things before the mind catches up to them. The body had brought her here. The body had found the high ground in this town and stayed on it and watched. She thought about what the letter had said. She thought about the last paragraph, which she could already, having read it twice, recite, in order. I am not asking you to forgive him what he did. That's yours to decide, and I won't reach from wherever I'm going to influence it. But I am asking you to know that I did not die bitter. I died knowing what I'd been doing all those years mattered. The work mattered. You finding out what happened and making it right if you do. When you do, that matters. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. That was always the only reason worth doing anything. Your father who loved you every day of his life, including the ones where he wasn't home to show it. She sat with that for another long time. Then she got up, checked the fire, and went to look at the street through the front window. Harrow Bluff. Night. Stars above it in the quantities that made Eastern men uncomfortable. The town she had been in for 4 years and had been, in some sense, moving toward for much longer. 12 days until the Albuquerque meeting. Winslow and Fitch and a town that was afraid. And her, Marshall Daniel Calloway's daughter. She stood at the window and looked at the street and felt the weight of everything settle into a specific shape that was not comfortable but was clear. Clear was enough. On the morning of the 3rd day, Fitch came to the shop. She had expected it. Not the exact form, she had considered various forms, but the general shape of it. That a decision had been reached, upstairs in Winslow's house, and this decision had been given to Fitch to execute. He came alone, which was interesting. Which told her that whatever the decision was, it was meant to look private rather than official. He knocked. She opened the door. He was up close, the same as he was at distance. The stillness, the pale eyes, the quality of a man who had distilled himself down to something essential over many years, and had stopped carrying the excess. Miss Calloway, he said. Mr. Farrow, she said. His face did something minimal, controlled, but present. He had not expected her to know his name. Come in, she said. I have coffee. She turned and walked back into the shop and poured 2 cups and set them on the work table and sat down on her work stool and looked at him. He came in. He did not sit. He stood with the cup in his hand, and they had a moment of mutual assessment that felt, for reasons she couldn't have entirely articulated, like two people who have been told different things about each other and are comparing the account to the reality. Mr. Winslow, he said, wants you to know that the matter of this morning 2 mornings ago is considered settled. A misunderstanding, Singh was corrected. He bears no ill will. That's generous of him, she said. He'd like you to stay in Harrow Bluff, Fitch continued, undisturbed. Continue your business. He has no interest in creating problems for a woman going quietly about her life. She looked at her coffee, and in return, Fitch said, the matter stays where it is. Nobody goes looking for things they don't need to find. Nobody sends letters to Albuquerque. She raised her eyes to him. He was watching her with those pale eyes that were currently doing more work than the rest of his face. That's a generous offer, she said. Mr. Winslow is a generous man. Is that a yes? Fitch said. She looked at him, at the stillness of him, at the thing underneath the stillness that she had been thinking about. Since Aldous had told her about Caleb Farrow, 24 years old, carrying a piece of iron pipe on a March morning in 1870, dead on an Albuquerque street for the crime of resembling the wrong man from a distance. She thought about what it cost to carry that for 13 years. She thought about the letter in her pocket. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. No, she said, it's not a yes. He absorbed this without visible change of expression. Miss Calloway, he said, I need you to understand the nature of this conversation. What Mr. Winslow is offering. I understand what he's offering, she said. I understand the alternative he's implying. I'm telling you the answer to both is no. He looked at her for a moment longer. He won't ask again, Fitch said. I know, she said. She stood up, Mr. Farrow. She looked at him directly. I know about Albuquerque, 1870. I know about Caleb. The stillness in him changed its quality. Not much. The way temperature changes in a room when someone opens a window, not dramatic, but present, felt on the skin. Then you know I'm not the person to threaten, he said. His voice the same flat register, but with something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. I know you've been looking for Aldous Prentice for 13 years, she said. I know you work for Winslow, because this territory is where Prentice is. He said nothing. I know what you want, she said, and I know it's not what Winslow wants. I know those two things are currently traveling together, because that's convenient. I'm asking you to think about whether they need to keep traveling together. A long silence. What are you asking me? He said. I'm not asking you anything, she said. Not today. I'm just telling you that I know who you are. Both of you. The man working for Winslow and the one underneath that. He set his coffee cup down on the work table. Looked at it. Looked at her. Prentice, he said. He's not in town. No. He rode north. She said nothing. The documents, Fitch said slowly. They're going to Albuquerque. She said nothing. Winslow doesn't know that yet, Fitch said. She watched him think. She could see it happening, not the thoughts themselves, but the shape of the process. The particular quality of a man who has spent years operating on a single fixed purpose and is, for the first time, considering what happens outside that purpose. Mr. Farrow, she said quietly, you lost your brother to a wrong decision made in the wrong second by a man who should have been more careful. That's true. That happened. Nothing changes it. She paused. Winslow put a 17-year-old girl on a platform with a noose around her neck and left her there because she was useful, and then she stopped being useful, and he didn't bother to stop the machinery. He didn't lose a brother. He just needed a signature and used whatever pressure was available. That's a different thing. Fitch looked at her. One of those men, she said, is going to be held accountable for what he did. The documentation is already on its way. She held his gaze. The other one is a question I don't know the answer to yet. He was quiet for a long time. Miss Calloway, he said finally. Yes. You know he's going to come at you before those documents reach anyone. I know. You know I'll be... He stopped, something arriving at its edge. When he sends me, I'll come. I know that too, she said. He looked at her for one more long moment, the pale eyes doing their reading and their calculating, and underneath those, something she had not been certain she would find there, and was now certain she had. Grief. Old grief. The well-maintained kind. He picked up his hat. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Your father was a decent lawman, he said, not looking at her. That's just factual. From what I knew, she said nothing. He didn't deserve what happened to him, Fitch said. No, she said. He didn't. He left. She stood in the shop and listened to his footsteps move away down the boardwalk and become part of the general sound of the street. And she thought about what had just happened and what it might mean and how much she could and couldn't rely on any of it. Some men, she thought, could only hold so much at once. And some men had been holding the same thing for so long that there was nothing left inside them to hold anything else. She was not sure which one Fitch was. She supposed she would find out. On the fourth day, Wren found something. Not in the documents. Not in anything she had taken from the safe. In the map. She had been looking at her father's hand-drawn survey from 1872, and something in the configuration of the land had been nagging at her, in the way that things nag when they are almost connected, but the connection isn't visible yet. She spread the map on the table. What was nagging her was the line her father had drawn connecting several points. Not a property boundary, not a road. A line connecting the Callaway land to the Devlin land to the ridge south of town and then west to the far ridge. A survey line. She looked at it for a long time. She got up and found the letter from the railroad and looked at the territory description in the meeting agenda. Her father had surveyed this land in 1872. The railroad survey for the northern line had been completed in 1880. She pulled out the land transfer records. Looking for the Callaway land, the land her father had marked, looking for when it had transferred. It wasn't there. She went through the records again. Every transaction, every name, every acre. The Callaway land did not appear, which meant it had never been sold, which meant it was still legally, in the records of the New Mexico Territory, the property of whoever had last filed a claim on it. She sat back. If Daniel Callaway had filed a homestead claim on that North Ridge land in 1872, 160 acres, under the Homestead Act, free to any citizen who worked it for 5 years, and if no one had ever contested or canceled it, then Winslow's railroad deal was not as clean as he thought it was. The key property in the railroad corridor might not be owned by Winslow at all, had never been acquired by Winslow. Still in the name of a deceased U.S. Marshal. She folded the map. Thought about the telegraph she needed to send, not to Albuquerque, but to the Territorial Land Office in Santa Fe, and about how the telegraph office in Harrow Bluff had a man in it that Winslow owned. She thought about the next town with a telegraph office, 17 miles north, 2 hours' ride. Then she went to find Cora. They left before dawn. 2 women on 2 horses, which in September 1883 in the New Mexico Territory was unremarkable enough if you kept a steady pace and looked like you had somewhere ordinary to be, which they did. Wren had a commission delivery reel, documented for a woman in Mescalero Crossing, 12 miles north, 5 miles short of the telegraph office in Paloma Station. The morning was cold, clear, the kind of clarity that comes to high desert at dawn when there is no moisture in the air to diffuse the light and everything presents itself with absolute precision, edge to edge. She rode. Beside her, Cora rode without conversation. Which was right? The girl read silences correctly. Another instinct. The sun cleared the eastern ridge, and the cold began its slow retreat, and the land around them opened into the kind of beauty that was simply present and not trying to be anything. The way beauty in natural places simply is without effort or agenda. She thought about worth holding. She thought about her father walking this land 11 years ago. Planning. Not just the case against Winslow. A future. A place. Something after the work was done. He had not gotten there, but the plan still existed. The map still existed. The land still existed, if the claim was still valid. She rode toward Paloma Station with the map in her vest pocket, and the documents beside it and the letter against her chest where she could feel the shape of it with every breath. And she thought about her father, who had been a careful man, who had been building something for a long time, and who had made sure in the ways he could, through the channels available to him, including the pocket of an old man who had wronged him, that his daughter would be here when it was time. She had been here. She was here now, and there was still work to do. They came back on the 9th day. Not the 10th, not the outside estimate. The 9th, which meant something had gone faster than calculated, which meant either luck or urgency. And Wren had learned, over 4 years of watching this territory, that luck and urgency were usually the same thing, wearing different clothes. She saw them from the roof. Of course she was on the roof. She had been up there since before dawn, which was where she tended to be when she needed to think without interruption, which was where her father had apparently told Aldous she would be, which meant it was a habit so deeply worn into her that the people who loved her had mapped it as a feature of who she was rather than a choice she kept making. Maybe it was both. Two riders coming from the North Road. The first was Tio. She knew his shape on a horse, the way you know a friend's handwriting, by the particular lean of it, the way he rode with his weight slightly forward, compensating for the shoulder he'd injured 3 years back in a forge accident. The second was Aldous. Greycoat catching the early light, the uneven pace of his horse, because Aldous rode a horse the way he walked with accommodation, with the slight asymmetry of a man who had long ago made peace with his body's particular complaints. And behind them, a third rider, bigger, straighter, a horse that was not a working horse, but a government horse, the specific quality of well-maintained animal that the U.S. Marshal's Office issued to men who needed to cover ground quickly and arrive looking authoritative. She was off the roof in 4 minutes. The marshal's name was Hector Brine, 47 years old. Albuquerque office. 14 years in the position, which meant he had been doing this long enough to have lost the performative quality that young marshals carried, the wide stance, the deliberate weight of every gesture, and had replaced it with something more efficient, more economical. He did not take up more space than he needed. He did not speak more words than the situation required. She liked him immediately, which was irrelevant, but she noted it. He came into Teo's forge, and she laid the documents on the workbench the same way she had laid them 9 days ago, and he looked at each one with the focused attention of a man who was building a case in real time, sorting information by weight and relevance and legal utility, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up. Gareth Winslow, he said, operating under that name since 1866. Warren Gids before that, she said. Webb County, Texas. 1865. The Loretto incident. He was already nodding. That case was never closed. Texas never stopped looking for Gids. They just stopped finding him. He looked at the wanted poster. 17 years. He was careful, she said. He was, Brine said, and then he got comfortable. He looked at the land transfer records, the judge's letters, the railroad correspondence. These are sufficient, more than sufficient. He looked at her. You collected all of this in 9 days. I collected most of it in 1 night, she said. The 9 days was waiting. Something moved in Brine's face that was professional appreciation, and something else. Something that looked at her the way people looked at her father when he produced something unexpected, and the production revealed more about the producer than the product. Your father, Brine said. Yes, I knew him. Not well, but enough. He paused. He was a careful man. Yes, she said. He was. Brine looked at the map, the survey map, the one with her father's handwriting on the back. He turned it over and read the note and was quiet for a moment. The territorial land records, he said. I sent a telegraph from Paloma Station, she said, 8 days ago. I should have a response by now, but I haven't been able to go back. I'll send a rider, he said immediately. Today. The land office in Santa Fe, she said. A claim filed under Daniel Calloway. Northern Ridge, approximately 4 miles north of Harrow Bluff. If the claim was filed and never contested, it would still be valid, he said. Homestead claims don't expire unless abandoned, and the abandonment is documented. He was already thinking about the implications. If that land is in the railroad corridor, it complicates Winslow's deal considerably. It makes the deal impossible without a transfer from the claimant, he said, which would be the estate of Daniel Calloway, which would be, he looked at her, which would be me, she said. Brine was quiet for a moment. Miss Calloway, he said, I want to be very clear about something. The legal dimension of what I've just described. I'm not doing this for the land, she said. He looked at her. My father left a letter, she said. Do it because it's right. That's what it said. Not because it benefits you. Not for any other reason. She paused. The land can go back to the territory. To the people he was trying to protect when Winslow had him removed. I don't want a reward. I want the case completed. Another moment of quiet from Brine. All right, he said, quietly, with the weight of a man who had met very few people who said that and meant it. Then let's complete it. They had 1 day. Brine had sent word ahead carefully. through channels that didn't run through the Harrow Bluff telegraph office, and he expected a deputy to arrive from Santa Fe within 24 hours, which would give him enough to move on Winslow's property without it becoming a siege. But one day meant Winslow had one day to find out. She sat with Brian and Aldous and Tio in the forge, and she laid out everything she knew about Winslow's property. The guards, the layout, the safe, the office, the exits, the schedule she had spent weeks mapping. Brian listened without interrupting, which was the right call, because she was building something precise, and interruptions would have broken the architecture of it. When she finished, he nodded. "The railroad man," he said. "You said he's been in contact." "He was at the house 9 days ago," she said. "I don't know if he's still in Harrow Bluff." "If he is, he becomes a witness," Brian said. "Involuntary, but present. Winslow won't want him present when the arrest happens." "No. Which means Winslow might move the meeting." He looked at the calendar in his mind. "If I were Winslow and I sensed something shifting in the territory." "He's sensed it," she said. "He's been watching me for 9 days, and I haven't done what he expected, which is disappear or comply or both. That tells him something is in motion. He doesn't know what, but he knows. Then he accelerates," Brian said. "He accelerates," she confirmed. "Tonight," Tio said from the corner, where he'd been quiet through all of this. Everyone looked at him. "If you're right," he said to Wren, "about what he'll do, then tonight is when he does it, not tomorrow. Tonight." She thought about it. About Winslow. About the architecture of how he'd operated for 17 years. Careful and patient and layered. But Winslow's patience was the patience of a man operating from a position of control. The moment control felt uncertain, the patience changed. She had been making his control feel uncertain for 9 days. "Tonight," she said. "Yes, probably tonight." Brian absorbed this with the efficiency of a man recalculating. "Then we don't wait for the deputy. You, me, and these two," she said. A pause. "Miss Calloway, Marshal Brian." She looked at him directly. "I know this property better than anyone in this room. I know the layout, the guard positions, the timing. I know where the documents are and how to get to them, and what order to take them in so nothing is lost if something goes wrong." She held his gaze. "You can do this without me and do it adequately. Or you can do it with me and do it correctly." Brian considered this. The particular consideration of a man who knows he is being presented with an argument he can't adequately counter, but wants to make sure he's looked at every angle before conceding. "You stay back from direct engagement," he said finally. "I'll stay as far back as the situation requires," she said, which was not quite the same thing, but it was what she had. He heard the difference, chose not to push it. Good man. She spent the afternoon of that last day doing something that looked from the outside like ordinary work. She sat at the sewing machine. She finished the 3rd commission, which had been waiting for 2 weeks. She delivered it herself. She walked through Harrow Bluff in the middle of the afternoon, the bright, flat, honest light of September in the high desert. And she walked slowly, and she looked at everything she had been looking at for 4 years. And she let herself really see it. The hardware store, the dry goods and post office, the saloon that opened at noon and closed when it felt like it, the school, empty now, the children somewhere else doing September things, the church, which had a preacher who came through once a month and otherwise sat locked and patient, the boardwalk where she had walked every day for 4 years, the street where a gallows had stood for 2 days and had now been dismantled, the wood stacked behind the livery in a pile that nobody wanted to use for anything else, the roof of her own shop from which, 11 days ago, she had cut a rope at 60 yards and begun the process of finishing what her father had started, in 1872. She walked back to the shop. Cora was there, had been there most days, finding reasons to be useful. She had turned out to be very useful in the specific way of a person who pays close attention and notices things, and then mentions them without dramatizing the mentioning. "You're walking differently," Cora said. "Am I less careful? Less?" She searched. "Less like someone who doesn't want to be looked at." "I suppose there's not much point in that anymore," Wren said. Cora looked at her. "You look like your father," she said. "The way you described him." Wren looked at her. "You never met my father." "No," Cora said. "But you described him. The way he moved through a room. The way he looked at things." She tilted her head. "That's what you look like right now." Something happened in Wren's chest. Something small and enormous at the same time, the way things can be both. "Good," she said, and meant it. Winslow moved at 9:30. Not toward her. Toward the North Road. Cora saw it first. She was at the window of the dry goods store, and she saw the carriage come around from behind Winslow's property. Not the usual carriage. The one he kept for travel. Larger. With the kind of luggage strapping on the back that indicated distance rather than a local errand. She was in the forge in 4 minutes. 4 minutes after that, Wren was in Brian's temporary quarters at the north end of town. He's running, she said. Brian was already moving. The particular efficient movement of a man who had prepared for multiple contingencies and was now activating the correct one. He's heading north. The meeting in Albuquerque, he's moving it up. He's going to complete the railroad deal and then disappear. Once the money transfers. The money is the evidence, Brian said. He was buckled and armed, and at the door in the time it took her to say 2 sentences. Without the transfer on record, the land fraud case is complicated. With it, it's airtight. He can't complete the deal without the deed transfers, she said, and the deed transfer records are in the safe. Then he goes back for them, Brian said, before he leaves. They looked at each other. The office, she said. The office, he said. They went through the dark at a pace that was faster than was entirely wise and slower than the urgency demanded, which was the only pace available to people trying to move quickly without sounding like they were moving quickly. Brian Aldous Teo Wren. And Cora, who had been told to stay at the forge and had said all right in that particular 2-word tone of hers, which Wren had recognized, on reflection, as the tone of someone who has decided to comply with the letter of an instruction while exercising independent judgment about its spirit. She was 20 feet behind them when they reached the alley. Wren looked back and saw her. Said nothing. Cora said nothing. They moved. The front of the property was different from 9 days ago. 2 guards had become 1. The one remaining was not in the positioned stance of a man on duty, but the distracted stance of a man who had been told something was happening and was trying to understand whether his specific post was still relevant to it. Brian went to the front. Directly. Openly. The badge out, the voice at its most official Federal Register. The guard made a decision about federal authority that was the correct decision and stepped back, and Brian moved through. She went around the back. Same route. Same 4-foot alley. Same ground under the same soft-soled boots. But faster this time. Because the first time she had been moving in silence and in secret, and this time she was moving in urgency, and urgency had its own rhythm that was not the rhythm of stealth. The window was still unlatched. Small mercies. She went through, into the storage room, and through to the connecting passage and to the office door, and she stopped. Light under the door. She stood with her hand on the frame, and listened and heard, from inside, the sounds of a man moving with purpose through a room. Drawers opening. Papers moving. The particular sound of a heavy object, the safe swinging, and then the rustle of things being gathered. She opened the door. Gareth Winslow was 67 years old, which she knew from the territorial records, but had not, until this moment, really absorbed. Because Winslow had always been in the information she had assembled, in the picture she had built a force, a structure, the kind of presence that occupied more space in the mind than in reality, expanded by 17 years of accumulated power into something that felt inevitable, permanent. He was an old man, standing in the lamplight of his own office with a leather satchel in his hand and papers halfway into it, wearing a traveling coat that had already been buttoned, looking at the woman who had just come through his office door with the expression of a man who has run a very long race and turned in the last mile to find the finish line has moved, tired. That was the dominant quality. Under the calculation that came immediately after the surprise, the assessment, the option weighing, the look at her hands and at the Colt and at the door behind her, under all of that, he was tired. 17 years was a long time to be something you weren't. She stood in the door, Colt at her side, not raised. She was not raising it. She had not come here to shoot a tired old man. "Miss Calloway," he said. His voice was composed. She gave him credit for that. "Mr. Winslow," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then looked at the satchel in his hand, then looked back at her. "You're too late," he said. The deal isn't done," she said. "The meeting in Albuquerque hasn't happened. The money hasn't transferred, and the documentation in that satchel is what you need to complete it." He held the satchel. "The railroad will find another way," he said. "Eventually," she said. "But not tonight, and not with you." Another look. The calculation still running behind his eyes, though slower now. the options being weighed and found insufficient one by one. Fitch, he said. Fitch isn't coming, she said. She didn't know this, but she said it the way her father had taught her to say things that needed to be true, with enough certainty that the statement shaped the situation rather than reported it. Winslow's jaw tightened slightly. You've been in this office before, he said. He was looking at the safe. The door still open the way she had left it 9 days ago. The documents I couldn't account for. Yes. The marshal's office in Albuquerque. Yes. You've been preparing this for. I've been preparing it since I was 22 years old, she said. I just needed 9 days to finish. He looked at her. And for a moment, just a moment, a gap in the calculation, where something else came through, she saw it. What was under all of it? Under Warren Gidds and Gareth Winslow and 17 years of accumulated careful crime. A man who had been afraid for a very long time. Not of her. Not of the law. Of the thing he'd done in 1865 and hadn't been able to put down since. The thing that had shaped every subsequent choice, every careful acquisition, every bought judge, every silence witness, as an attempt to build enough distance between himself and that May morning in Laredo that it would eventually stop being real. It had never stopped being real. Some things don't. He came to me, Winslow said, surprising her. Your father, in 1878. She went very still. Before any of this with you. He told me what he had. What he'd built over 6 years of investigation. He offered me. He stopped. He offered me a way to resolve the Laredo situation quietly. Before it became public, he said if I came forward, if I made restitution, if I came clean about what I'd done in 1865, he would advocate for consideration before the court. She had not known this. She stood in the lamplight and held this new information, and looked at the shape it put on everything. Her father had offered him a way out. Before the false testimony. Before the badge was stripped. Before the 8 months. He had said no. And then, because her father had kept investigating, Winslow had found Aldous and used him, and everything that followed had followed. He offered you justice, she said. You chose this instead. I chose survival, Winslow said. Those used to be the same thing, she said. For you, for a long time. She looked at him. They're not anymore. The door behind her opened. Brine. He came in with the particular economy of movement that characterized everything he did. And he looked at Winslow. And he looked at Wren. And he took in the room. Mr. Winslow, he said. I'm U.S. Marshal Hector Brine, Albuquerque office. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of one Warren Gidds, also known as Gareth Winslow, on charges of murder, robbery, and land fraud. He held out his hand. I'll take the satchel. Winslow looked at the satchel, looked at Brine, looked at Wren. She said nothing. She had nothing left to say. Everything that needed saying had been said over 4 years and 9 days. And one night in this office, and one conversation in the lamplight of a tired man's face, he set the satchel on the desk. He put his hands where Brine could see them. And Gareth Winslow Warren Gidds, who had been running for 18 years, stopped running. Fitch came out of the dark 20 minutes later. She had known he would. Not because she had been certain of him, she had not been, not entirely, but because the logic of who he was pointed in one direction, and she had followed the logic. He was standing at the end of the alley when she came out. Not blocking it, standing beside it. The difference mattered. She stopped. He looked at her. He's in custody, she said. I know, Fitch said. I've been here. She absorbed this. He had been here. In the dark. While it happened. He had watched Brine go in through the front. Had seen her go around the back. Had positioned himself where he could see both and had stayed there and not moved. Aldous, he said. Inside, she said. Still, she said, yes. He looked at the mouth of the alley. Beyond it, the back of Winslow's property in the lamplight from the open windows. The shapes of Brine's operation moving through the house, with the systematic thoroughness of federal authority doing federal work. I want you to understand something, Fitch said. She waited. What I told Winslow about you, he said, in the 9 days. What I reported. She looked at him. I told him you were keeping the shop open, Fitch said. I told him you were watching but not moving. I told him you were scared. He paused. I didn't tell him about the ride to Paloma Station. I didn't tell him about the telegraph. I didn't tell him the forge was empty because Tio had gone north. She stood in the dark alley and held this. Why? She said. He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone reaching for words that don't come easily, and would not come at all, If the person asking were anyone different. Your father was a decent lawman, he said again. The same words from the shop, but with more behind them this time. More weight. More of the thing underneath. Caleb would have, he stopped. Started again. Caleb would have said the same thing. My brother. He wasn't the kind of person who wanted anyone else to lose something because of what happened to him. She looked at Fitch. At Graham Farrow, 36 years old, who had spent 13 years carrying a weight that had shaped every decision and every mile and every job he'd taken in the service of a revenge that was, in the end, against a man who had made a terrible mistake in a bad second and had spent 20 years trying to pay for it. He still made the mistake, she said. Aldous. I know, Fitch said. I know what he did. I know what it cost. He looked at her directly. I also know what I've cost. The things I've done for Winslow. Things that... He stopped. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know. About the 9 days. What I told him and didn't tell him. She looked at him for a long time. This man. This tired, lean, pale-eyed man, who had followed a grief across a territory for 13 years and had arrived somewhere he hadn't intended. Aldous is inside, she said. He'll be inside for a while. When he comes out, that's between you and him. I won't be in the middle of it. Fitch absorbed this. But, she said, I'm asking you one thing. He waited. Make it a conversation, she said. Not the other kind. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face. Old and new, at the same time, the way things are when a very long-held feeling encounters something it wasn't expecting. All right, he said. Just those 2 words. The same 2 words Cora used. Harrow Bluff, apparently, had a particular way of saying yes to difficult things. He turned and walked back into the dark, and that was the last time she spoke to Fitch Farrow that night. What happened after was not dramatic. That was what she would remember most about the end of it. Not the gallows morning, not the office confrontation, not the alley with Fitch. The thing she would remember was how undramatic the machinery of justice was when it finally arrived. Papers, forms, the careful documentation of the transfer of a man from one kind of custody to another. The satchel inventoried, item by item, in Brian's precise handwriting. The safe emptied and cataloged. The California property documents and the false identity papers and the money, all of it laid out on a table in the parlor of Winslow's house, while a federal marshal recorded it in the specific language of federal recording. Not dramatic, just thorough. She sat in the parlor and watched it happen. Aldous was in the corner, which was where he was. Tio was outside, which was where he preferred to be. Cora was somewhere nearby. She could hear her occasionally, speaking to someone, asking something in the practical way she had of being present in a situation without being in the way. Brian came to her at some point. Set a piece of paper on the table in front of her. From the Santa Fe land office, he said. My rider came back an hour ago. I've been holding it. She looked at the paper. It was a confirmation. A homestead claim. Filed in November 1872 by one Daniel Calloway, United States Marshal, for 160 acres on the North Ridge, 4 miles north of Harrow Bluff, New Mexico Territory. The claim was active, undisputed, untransferred. His handwriting on the filing at the bottom. She knew it without needing to look closely. It's in the railroad corridor, she said. Yes, Brian said. Then the deal cannot proceed without a transfer from the estate, he said. Which means from you. He paused. There's no urgency. The railroad can wait. The territory can wait. You can decide what you want to do with it whenever you're ready to decide. She looked at the confirmation. 160 acres. Her father's handwriting. Worth holding. Future family residence. She folded the confirmation and put it in her vest pocket. Not the letter pocket. Different pocket. Its own space. Thank you, she said to Brian. He nodded. Went back to his cataloging. Aldous found her on the porch. Not the front porch. The side porch. The one that faced north. The one that looked out toward the ridge that was, as of November 1872, by some legal machinery her father had set in motion, the same year he had written to a criminal telling him justice was coming hers. She was sitting on the porch steps, looking north. The night was very clear and very cold, and the stars were the quantities that made Eastern men uncomfortable, and she was not looking at any one of them specifically, just at all of them together, the whole enormous distribution of them. Aldous came out and stood behind her. He didn't sit. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there in the way of someone who has something to say and is choosing the moment carefully. She said it for him. Fitch came to see you, she said. Yes. And a long pause. And we talked, Aldous said. For a long time. Another pause. He's going to Santa Fe. He has contacts there. People who can help him with the consequences of the choices he's made the past few years. He paused again. He's not a bad man. No, she said. He's not. He was a man with a specific grievance, Aldous said. And not enough that was bigger than the grievance. Until maybe now. She was quiet. Wren, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. Not Miss Calloway. Not the formal distance of it. Her name. She looked up at him. He looked old, standing there in the porch light. Old in the way that was not decrepit, but was simply the honest accounting of 63 years of living them. Lined and weathered and tired in the specific way of a man who has finally set something down after carrying it a very long time. I have been afraid, he said, for 4 years, that I would find you and hand you that letter, and you would read it and it would make no difference. That what I did was not the kind of thing that letters addressed. Not the kind of thing that time addressed. She looked at him. I'm still not sure, he said, that it's addressed. I'm not asking you to tell me that it is. He pressed his lips together. I wanted to do the thing he asked. Find you. Keep you safe. Be useful. I don't know if I did it adequately. She thought about that morning 11 days ago. The man walking up the center of a street. The courage of it, which was the courage of someone who has decided that the debt is more important than the safety, and who has made that decision so completely that the fear stops being the operative feeling. She thought about 9 days of a man who had been wrong, horribly wrong, in a way that had cost her father everything, who had sat in a forge and answered her questions and not flinched from any of it, who had ridden north for 4 days and brought back what she needed, who had walked into Winslow's property tonight without hesitation. Useful. Was that adequacy? She didn't know. She wasn't sure she was the right person to decide what adequacy looked like in this particular mathematics, but she knew what her father had said. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. She stood up, turned to face Aldous Prentice. The case is complete, she said. My father's case. The thing he spent 7 years building. It's done. It's in Brian's hands, and it's going to proceed the way it should proceed. And the people who were harmed are going to get something back. Maybe not everything, but something. She looked at him. That's what matters. That's the part that was worth doing. He nodded. I haven't forgiven you, she said. I want to be honest about that. I don't know if I will. That's not a decision I can make right now. I know, he said. But she said. She paused, looking for the right words. Finding finally, her father's way of finding them, not reaching, not decorating, just stating the thing that was true. My father asked me to know that he didn't die bitter. That's in the letter. He wanted me to know. And I think he wanted you to know that I know. Aldous stood very still. He forgave you, she said, directly. In his own words. In that letter. He was clear about it. And he was a clear man. And he meant it. She held his gaze. I can't give you forgiveness that isn't mine to give. But I can tell you that the man whose forgiveness matters, who matters more than mine, gave it. In writing. In November 1879, when he had every reason not to. The porch was very quiet. Aldous's face did several things. Quickly. The way faces move when something they have been braced against for a very long time suddenly isn't there anymore. And the muscles that were braced have to find a new posture. He looked away. At the north horizon. At the dark ridge that was 4 miles out. Her father's land. She gave him the time for it. That was all she had. That was all she could give. But sometimes time was the thing. After a while he said quietly, Thank you. She didn't respond to that. She looked north too. The ridge was dark and invisible against the sky, except for the fact that the stars where it started, the ridge cutting its shape into the star field, and she could see the line of it that way, by what it displaced, by the darkness it made in a different darkness, worth holding. She would have to decide what to do with it. The land. That was a decision for another time, another state of mind, another conversation she hadn't had yet. Maybe she would keep it. Maybe she would find the people her father had been trying to protect and do something useful with it in their direction. Maybe both. Maybe something she hadn't thought of yet. But it was there. And it was hers. And her father had put it there the same year. He had started building the case against Winslow, with the patience of a man who thought about futures, who thought about what came after the work, who looked at a south-facing slope and good water and thought worth holding. She had been here 4 years. She had not until now understood that she had been where he put her. In the morning, Harrow Bluff woke to find Gareth Winslow gone. Not vanished, not escaped, simply gone in the official sense. In federal custody, headed south, accompanied by Marshal Brine and the language of federal charges that would eventually reach a federal courtroom in a city with the resources to handle them. The town absorbed this in the sideways way it absorbed things. There was no celebration. There was something quieter than that. Something that moved through the streets and the conversations and the way people looked at each other, a slight lightening, a marginal reduction in the weight that had been sitting on the place for 17 years. Not nothing, but not dramatic either, because the town still had to be a town. The hardware store still opened. The dry goods and post office still operated. The forge Tio, who came back from the north and stood in his building and looked at everything that was still in the same place and got to work. The forge fired up at the regular hour. Cora went home. She went in the mid-morning, carrying nothing she hadn't arrived with, and she knocked on her father's door and went inside. Wren watched her go from across the street. Did not follow. That conversation was not hers to have or witness. What came of it, the father and the daughter and the 80 acres, and the decision to sign, and the things left unsaid, and the things now said she didn't know and didn't ask. Some things resolve slowly and in private, and the resolution doesn't look like anything from the outside. She hoped for them. That was all she could do. Hope. Aldous was gone by noon. He came to the shop before he left, stood in the doorway. His horse was behind him, already tacked and pointed south. He had not said where he was going. She had not asked. Some men needed to go somewhere after the long thing is finished, needed to move, needed the road under them while they worked out what came next. He stood in the doorway and looked at her at the sewing machine. "Your father's Winchester," he said. "The one he taught you to shoot with. He kept it for years after the badge was gone. I don't know what happened to it after he passed." "I have it," she said. "He left it to me." Aldous nodded, unsurprised. "Of course he did," he said. She looked up from the machine, held his gaze for a moment. "When you figure out where you're going," she said. He waited. "Send a letter," she said. "I don't need an answer to anything. She paused. "I'd like to know you're somewhere." Something happened in his face. Small, enormous, both. "All right," he said. He left. She heard his horse move south on the main street. The sound of it, the particular uneven rhythm of a horse ridden by a man who compensated, growing smaller and then becoming part of the general sounds of the town and then not part of them anymore. She sat at the sewing machine. She sat there for a long time. What happened in the weeks and months that followed was not fast. It was not elegant. Justice through bureaucratic process rarely is. But it moved. The judge, Emmett, resigned his appointment in November, citing health. The health in question was the kind that arrives with federal correspondence describing the specific nature of one's legal exposure. The land transfer records, both the official ones and Winslow's annotated versions, went to Santa Fe and were examined by people with the authority to do something about what they found. The Devlin land came back. Not all of it, but enough. Vernon Devlin did not discuss publicly the circumstances of the signing. Cora did not ask him to. The gap between them, the thing that had been said by the not telling and was now unsayable, she carried with the particular quiet of a person who has learned that some things between people cannot be resolved by conversation, only by time and the willingness to keep going. She grew into it. Tio's forge expanded the following spring. New bellows, new anvil, the kind of investment a man makes in a place when he has decided it's where he is. Warren Gids, tried in federal court in Austin, Texas, in the spring of 1884, for the murders of Laredo in May 1865, and for land fraud against the people of Harrow Bluff, was convicted on all counts. He was 68 years old. He lived to serve 11 months of his sentence. He died in a federal facility in the summer of 1884 as Gareth Winslow, which was the name on his intake paperwork and the name on the record of his death. He had stopped being Warren Gids in 1866. Some men spend a long time running from who they were and arrive, in the end, somewhere they don't recognize. Aldous Prentice sent a letter in February from Tucson. Brief. a return address, a single line that said, "Found work. Adequate." The hills here remind me of nothing in particular, which is a relief. She read it twice and put it with the other letters and sent a reply that was equally brief and equally sufficient. Fitchfarrow. She heard his name once, 8 months later, from a man passing through Harrow Bluff, who had come from Santa Fe and mentioned a former hired gun who had apparently walked into the marshal's office there and offered information substantial and documented and specific about the inner workings of Winslow's land operations and the names of certain territorial figures who had been on Winslow's payroll. In exchange for what, the man passing through didn't know. She thought she could guess. Some things can't be returned, but they can be accounted for. And accounting for them doing the difficult, undramatic, specific work of standing in a marshal's office and saying, "Here is what I did and here is what I know," was the kind of thing that changed the direction of a life, even if it didn't erase the history of it. She hoped it changed his direction. She did not know if hoping was enough, but it was what she had. 3 weeks after the arrest, when October had properly arrived and the September light was a memory, she went to the North Ridge for the first time. She went alone. Early morning. Cold. She rode the 4 miles north of town on the road. It turned to trail, and then to suggestion, and then to nothing. And she tied the horse where the trail ended and walked the last half-mile on foot. The land was what her father had described. South-facing slope, good water. She heard it before she found it. A small spring running from the rock face on the eastern edge of the property. Clear and cold and regular. Rolling ground. The kind that would need work but was not hostile to it. The kind of ground that would respond to attention. She stood on the slope and looked south toward Harrow Bluff. From here she could see the town in the way. You see a place from high ground. Its actual size, which was small. Its actual scope, which was manageable. Its relationship to the landscape around it, which was one small human thing in a very large and indifferent country that would still be here when the town was long gone. She thought about her father standing exactly here. November 1872. Younger than she was now. 23, 24. Already a marshal. Already investigating. Already carrying the weight of what he knew about Winslow and what it would take to prove it. Standing here and thinking about futures. Future family residence. She pulled the map from her vest pocket and held it. Looked at the survey lines he had drawn. The way they corresponded to the actual terrain around her. The accuracy of his eye. The care of the documentation. She turned it over and read the note one more time. She had read it many times by now. It was not getting shorter. Notes don't shorten. But it was getting familiar. The way things become familiar when you carry them long enough that they stop being foreign objects and become part of you, part of your weight, the weight you have accommodated and made your particular way of moving. She folded the map, put it in one pocket, put her hand in the other pocket, and felt the envelope, the letter, which she also carried, which she would probably carry for a long time. Because some things you keep, not because you need to read them again, but because the having been read is the point. She thought about what she was going to do with this land. She had not decided. She was moving toward a decision the way you move toward high ground, not rushing, because rushing gets you there out of breath and unable to see clearly, but steadily, with intention. Maybe she would something here. Not a legacy, not a monument. Something functional. A house with a south-facing window and enough room for a forge if Tio wanted a partner. Maybe she would give some of the land back to the people her father had been trying to protect when Winslow had him removed. The Devlins. Mrs. Ingram, who was elderly and alone, and whose property had been in the process of being swallowed before the machinery stopped. Not charity. Something closer to completion. To the ending of something that had been interrupted. Maybe both. Maybe something she hadn't thought of yet. She turned away from the view south and looked north. The ridge continuing, the desert continuing, the country continuing in every direction without apparent end or apology. The sky above it, doing what the October sky did, enormous, clear, slightly too much of itself for comfort. She thought about Aldous, wherever he was moving toward. She thought about Cora, who was 17, and had been on a gallows platform, and had kept her chin up, and who would be something someday, that Wren couldn't precisely predict, but felt confident about. She thought about her father, about the letter, about every day of his life, including the ones where he wasn't home to show it, about the man who had put her here, not just on this ridge, not just on this land, but here, present, capable, in possession of his Winchester and his patience and the particular way of looking at a room that he had taught her and that she had made hers. She did not feel sad. She felt, for the first time in 4 years, something she identified carefully, wanting to name it accurately because accurate naming was how you didn't lose things. She felt the weight settle into the shape of her. Not lift, not leave, but settle. The weight of what had happened and who she was and what her father had been and what he had left, not just the land, not just the case, not just the letter, but the whole of what a person leaves when they have lived carefully and with intention and with the particular stubbornness that her father had called honesty. She felt it settle, and she stood on the south-facing slope in the October light, with the wind coming off the ridge behind her, and the town 4 miles south, still being a town, and the case closed and the work complete. And she took the badge from the inner pocket of her coat, the marshal's badge, silver, dented on one corner from something she didn't know what, some moment she had not witnessed. Her father's name was not on it. Badges don't carry names. They carry office. They carry the idea of a thing, not the particular person who held the thing. She held it in her palm, heavy for its size, the way truth is heavy for its size. She was not going to pin it on. She was not a marshal. She had no appointment, no authority, no intention of acquiring either. She was a woman who owned a seamstress shop in Harrow Bluff and could shoot a rope at 60 yards and had completed the 11-year case her father had built and had chosen not to pull a trigger on the man who had destroyed his career. She was not her father. She was his. There was a difference, and both things were true. She closed her hand around the badge. She stood there for a moment longer, with the land around her and the sky above it, and the weight of everything arranged, finally, into a shape that was not comfortable but was clear, and clear was enough. She put the badge back in her pocket. She turned south. She walked back down the slope toward the horse and the trail and the 4 miles and the town. The badge stayed in her pocket. She thought about what to do with it for a long time, longer than most decisions took her. In the end, she kept it, not displayed, not mounted, in the pocket of the coat she wore when she went to the ridge, which she did sometimes in the evenings when the light was right. And she wanted to think without interruption and needed, without knowing it, to be where her father had stood and looked south and thought about the future. Her father had carried it for 22 years. She would carry it for whatever came next. Some things you hold because they're useful. Some things you hold because they remind you of something. The badge reminded her of what was possible when a person decided that doing the right thing was more important than the cost of doing it, which was a reminder she expected to need, which was why she kept it close. On the night she finally fixed the loose shingle, the one she had gone up to fix, on the morning this all began, the morning she had stayed because something felt wrong, the morning that had turned out to be, the morning everything started. She sat on the roof for a long time afterward, not to watch, not because something felt wrong, just because the high ground was still the high ground, and because some habits are not habits. They are just who you are. The stars were out in their quantities. The ridge was dark against them, visible by what it displaced. The town below her was doing its late evening things, the ordinary sounds of a small place going to sleep. She sat with the Winchester across her knees, not in her hands, beside her, because she was still thinking, always still thinking. A gun beside you means you're still thinking. She sat with the October cold coming off the ridge and the town below her and the case closed and the work done and the letter in one pocket and the badge in another and the land to the north that was hers and everything her father had built and left for her, arranged finally, in the shape it had always been moving toward, clear. She looked north at the dark line of the ridge against the stars. She thought it was. She thought it was worth it. She thought that was enough. And they say the West was tamed by law and order. Maybe that's true. Maybe the railroads and the fences and the federal courts did what they were supposed to do and brought civilization to a place that had been running on gunpowder and stubbornness and the particular kind of hope that only grows in country where there's enough room for it. But in Harrow Bluff, in the fall of 1883, what held things together for one more day was not a system. It was not an institution. It was not the weight of government arriving on a well-maintained horse. It was a girl on a rooftop who had been waiting for 4 years and an old man who finally stopped running from himself long enough to walk towards something, and a blacksmith who never said much but never left either, and a 17-year-old who kept her chin up when the rope was 3 inches from her neck and her eyes open and her face turned toward the people who were watching so she would remember. So she could say later, "I saw who was there. I know who stood and watched. I know who did nothing." She remembered all of them. She told Ren their names, months later, sitting in the shop while Ren worked, one by one, and Ren wrote them down, not as accusation, not as evidence, just as record, because her father had taught her that the most important thing a lawman could do was pay attention and write down what he saw, because the written thing survived when the remembered thing faded, because the record was the only thing that stood between what happened and the version of it that was comfortable to believe. She wrote down the names of 60 people who had stood in the street and done nothing. And she wrote down at the bottom, they were afraid. That's the truth of it. They were afraid, and fear makes people smaller than they want to be. And then she added one more line, in the particular way her father had, of making observations that were also verdicts. Some of them grew back to their full size afterward. Some of them didn't. That's the other truth of it. She folded the paper and put it with the map and the letter and the land claim confirmation in the box she kept under the bed in the back room of the seamstress shop. The box that held the things that mattered. Not the things she needed every day. The things she needed to know were there. The Winchester she kept visible, on the wall above the workbench, where she could see it from the sewing machine. Not as decoration, not as warning, just present, available. The way her father had always said a tool should be maintained, accessible, understood by the person who carried it. She looked at it every morning, and she thought about what it was for. And she thought about her father, who had spent 22 years carrying one just like it and had known, at the end, when to put it down and pick up a pen instead. The case was complete, the work was done, but the town was still there, and the people in it were still afraid, some of them, in the way that fear doesn't leave just because the thing that caused it has been removed, the way it lingers in the walls of a room after something terrible has happened in it, in the way a town carries a memory in its posture, in the slight flinch that moves through a crowd when someone raises their voice in the street. She stayed, not because she had decided to, exactly, not because there was a plan that required it, but because the shop was there, and the sewing machine was there, and the back room with the box under the bed was there, and the roof was there. And some mornings she climbed up to it before dawn, just to watch the light come in sideways and red and thin across the rooftops. And she felt the town breathing under her, and she thought, this is worth holding. Not the land, not the claim, not the 160 acres on the North Ridge that were legally hers and would remain legally hers until she decided otherwise. This, the town, the people in it who were trying to be larger than their fear. The forge where Teo was already working by the time the sun cleared the ridge. The Devlin house where Cora and her father were doing the slow and necessary work of figuring out what they were to each other now that the land was no longer the only thing between them. The street where the Gallows had stood and was now simply a street again, full of the ordinary traffic of people going about their ordinary lives worth holding. Her father's words, her father's land, her father's case completed. She was on the roof when she finally understood what the letter had meant. Not the words. She had memorized the words. She had understood the words from the first reading, or thought she had. But understanding words and understanding what words mean are different things, and sometimes the distance between them is measured in weeks or months, or the particular quality of early morning light on a familiar rooftop, the last paragraph. The part she kept coming back to. I am not asking you to forgive him what he did. That's yours to decide, and I won't reach from wherever I'm going to influence it. But I am asking you to know that I did not die bitter. I died knowing what I'd been doing all those years mattered. The work mattered. You finding out what happened and making it right if you do, when you do, that matters. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. That was always the only reason worth doing anything. Your father, who loved you every day of his life, including the ones where he wasn't home to show it. She had read it as instruction, as advice, as the last communication of a careful man who could not be present for what came next and was doing his best to be useful anyway. But sitting on the roof in the cold early morning of October, looking at a town that was still a town, and a ridge that was still a ridge, and a sky full of stars that were doing what stars do, regardless of what was happening beneath them, she understood it as something else. It was not instruction, it was permission. Permission to stop carrying the weight the way she had been carrying it, as grievance, as debt, as the thing that needed to be settled before anything else could be. Permission to set it down in its correct place, which was not forgotten, not erased, but present in the way that the past is always present, shaping without overwhelming, part of the architecture, without being the whole of it. Permission to keep going. She sat on the roof until the sun cleared the ridge, until the red light turned to the flat, honest light of full morning, until the town below her was fully awake and going about its ordinary things. And then she went down. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. That was, she thought, as she went through the shop and put the coffee on and sat down at the sewing machine and looked up at the Winchester on the wall, the most important thing she had inherited from her father. Not the rifle, not the badge, not the land, the understanding that there was always work to do, and the will to do it, because it was right. For no other reason, because it was right.